Chapter 285. The immature youth grabbed the bowl and finished another bowl of the sour and spicy soup. His mouth was slightly red from the spiciness, and he was constantly panting with beads of sweat on the tip of his nose. The taste of the sour and spicy soup was really too delicious. It was hard to imagine that such a delicious dish could be cooked with such simple ingredients. If the ingredients contained spirit energy, the immature youth could understand. But these were just ordinary ingredients that did not contain even the slightest bit of spirit energy. The taste of this kind of ingredient was even more delicious than ordinary ingredients with spirit energy. This was something that defied common sense and completely exceeded the understanding of the immature youth. At this moment, Wei Dafu's complexion was extremely ugly. His face was slightly flushed due to Bufang's mocking gaze. He felt a little embarrassed. He felt like he had been slapped in the face. His seniority in the cook's army unit was being challenged by this newcomer. This was unforgivable. This was simply plucking the hair on a tiger's nose. He was courting death. Although the taste of his dish was extremely delicious, this was not a reason for him to be arrogant. No matter how delicious it was still a dish cooked with ordinary ingredients. I admit, your dish is delicious, but don't think that you can be unscrupulous just because you made a delicious dish. You should know, this is the cook's army unit. We have to face the worst cooking environment, but we have to cook dishes that can satisfy the soldiers. Dishes that can keep the soldiers in their best condition. Wei Dafu said with a straight face. His voice was not loud, but it was extremely dignified. It caused the many cooks who had finished drinking Bufang's sour and spicy soup to stop what they were doing. They looked at the two of them and did not dare to breathe loudly. Many of them admired Bufang. This was because Bufang was the first among the newcomers to cook a dish that Wei Dafu could not even comment on. However, they could also imagine that Bufang's days in the cook's army unit would not be easy. After all, this was the cook's army unit, not an ordinary kitchen. You are really good at cooking, right? That's good. I won't make things difficult for you. After all, in my cook's army unit, every talent is a treasure. I'll let you cook, but since you can perfectly bring out the taste of ordinary ingredients, you'll be responsible for cooking ordinary ingredients from now on. Wei Dafu narrowed his eyes and muttered. The surrounding people were slightly astonished. However, after the astonishment, they looked at Bufang with some regret. That immature youth was also a little regretful. The majority of our cook's army unit comes in contact with spirit energy ingredients. No matter how delicious the dishes you make with ordinary ingredients are, the soldiers won't eat them. What a pity for this newbie. Many people let out such a sigh. They knew clearly in their hearts that it was not that Bufang did not know how to make spirit energy ingredients. He might be able to cook even more delicious dishes with spirit energy ingredients. After all, spirit energy ingredients could not enhance the taste of dishes compared to ordinary ingredients. When Bufang heard Wei Dafu's words, he couldn't help but furrow his brows. Could he only cook ordinary ingredients? Looking at the smug smile on Wei Dafu's face, Bufang grinned and nodded his head indifferently. He actually agreed. This made Wei Dafu extremely astonished. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and waited for Bufang to come and establish a relationship with him. After all, if he joined the cook's army unit and only cooked ordinary dishes, it would be the same as being frozen. Arrogant brat, overconfident brat. When you see that your dishes are ignored, you will obediently come and beg for forgiveness. At that time, it's hard to say whether I will forgive you or not. Wei Dafu coldly snorted in his heart. Long Kai, bring this brat to get his wok. Also, bring him to his camp and replace Goldie, who is in charge of cooking ordinary ingredients, with the spirit energy cooking position. Wei Dafu glanced at the expressionless Bufang and the muscles on his face twitched. Then, he looked at the immature youth and gave him an order. Taking the iron spoon, he returned to the tent. Long Kai looked at Wei Dafu's departing figure and immediately put down the ceramic bowl in his hand. He stuck out his tongue. Follow me, Long Kai said and took the lead to walk into the distance. My name is Long Kai. I am the youngest in the cook's army unit. What's your name? The hot and sour soup you made just now was really delicious. I have never tasted such a delicious, ordinary dish. Long Kai introduced himself to Bufong and looked at Bufong with sparkling eyes. My name is Bufong. Bufong nodded his head, indicating that he had finished his self-introduction. It was natural that his dishes were delicious. Bufong was not too surprised by Long Kai's reaction. Those who had eaten his dishes were basically in a state of shock. He was already used to it. Sigh. Even though you were assigned to the ordinary cooking camp, don't be discouraged. Uncle Wei is like this. After a while, he will change his mind and change you back. After all, your cooking skills are so good. You can definitely be ranked in the top 5 in the camp. Long Kai said with a smile, trying to ease the awkward atmosphere. Oh, Bufong followed behind Long Kai with an indifferent expression. He did not care about Wei Dafu's feelings at all. To him, Wei Dafu was nothing, whether it was in terms of cooking skills or strength. Bufong absolutely crushed his opponent. However, since Bufong had come to the camp to gain experience, it was better for him to keep a low profile. After completing the mission and receiving the reward, he would leave. Here, this is the camp that belongs to you. Inside it are all ordinary dishes. Every time our cook's army unit cooks a dish, you must also cook an ordinary dish. This is the rule. Long Kai pointed at a slightly shabby tent in the distance. Bufong frowned, but he quickly relaxed his brows. He did not care. After nodding his head, he directly walked over. Wait a moment, I will give you the equipment first. Long Kai shouted at Bufong, who was about to leave. He turned around and entered a tent beside him. After a while, he ran out of the tent with a big black wok. Within the wok, there was a kitchen knife with a wooden handle and an iron ladle. This will be your equipment in the cook's army unit in the future. Don't break it. If you break it, you will have to apply again. It is very troublesome. Moreover, you will be scolded by Uncle Wei, Long Kai said seriously. However, when he received the heavy black wok, the corners of his mouth curled up. He nodded his head and said, I understand. Hee, I picked a good wok for you. The quality is not bad. Don't worry too much. I hope that you can leave this camp that cooks ordinary dishes soon. When that time comes, I will have a good taste of the spirit energy delicacies you cook. Long Kai scratched his head and said with an embarrassed smile. Bufong raised his eyebrows and looked at the little guy. He curled his lips and did not say anything. He turned around and walked back to the camp. This time, Long Kai did not stop Bufong. He looked at Bufong's back and sighed. Then, he turned around and left. Although he said that Bufong would have a chance to return to the camp that cooks spirit energy ingredients, according to Uncle Wei's temper, Bufong would have to work for Bufong for at least a year and a half before he would have the chance to leave. Naturally, Bufong did not know what Long Kai was thinking. He only stepped into the camp. There were many ingredients piled up in the camp. The faint smell of mold and vegetables lingered at the tip of his nose. There were many ingredients in the camp. There were meat and vegetables. It was quite complete. However, just as Long Kai said, all the ingredients here were ordinary. Bufong calmly settled down in the camp and began his journey in the cook's army unit. The next morning, Bufong opened his eyes from the simple and crude bed. He sat cross-legged and did not lie down to sleep. He was a little misophobic and was not used to the bed in the camp for the time being. Just as Bufong opened his eyes, the sound of an iron ladle colliding with an iron wok came from outside the tent. Dang! 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 Then a coarse voice came out. All of you wake up. Prepare to set off. Chapter 286. The sound of the iron ladle colliding with the iron wok resounded throughout the entire cook's army camp, causing the originally tranquil camp to suddenly become noisy. Many people came out of the tents in the camp, rubbing their sleepy eyes. Bufong walked out of the tent and slowly walked toward the place where the crowd was concentrated. Troops usually had to assemble. Even though Bufong had never joined an army before, he still knew a little about such matters. In the cook's army unit, the sound of the wok striking was used to replace the sound of assembly. The hat on the head of the young Long Kai was slightly askew, and he had a drowsy look on his face. The firewood in the camp was burning, emitting crackling sounds that reverberated in the surroundings. The big iron wok on the wooden frame was being roasted by the raging flames. Bubbling sounds could be heard coming from within the wok, and white steam was rising from it. Water vapor was flowing out from the wok, along with spirit energy and a faint fragrance of porridge. At this moment, Wei Dafu was carrying an iron wok. He was hitting the wok with an iron spoon, making loud noises. There was a hint of anger on his face as he looked at the slow-moving group of people. He couldn't help but shout, "Hurry up! Don't think that the cook's army isn't a soldier. Hurry up and gather!" The cooks immediately became spirited and stood in line. Bu Fong, on the other hand, calmly followed behind the others and joined the team. This caused Wei Dafu, who was narrowing his eyes to look for Bu Fong, to feel a little regretful. He originally wanted to use this as an excuse to scold that arrogant brat. He did not expect that the brat would actually wake up so early to queue up. A normal recruit would sleep until the sun was high up in the sky. However, he didn't pay too much attention to this. He only snorted and looked at the cooks below him. "Straighten your chests. Yesterday, we received the general's order. Tomorrow, our third army will go out to fight against the enemy. The general asked us, the cook's army unit, to cook a sumptuous meal to satisfy the soldiers and raise their spirits, so that everyone can return victorious." Wei Dafu said loudly with his hands behind his back, acting like a vice captain. After saying that, the cooks below started chattering among themselves. Many of them were quite excited. It was time to show off their real skills. "So, you guys know what I'm going to say. Today's dish, you guys better prepare it well. Don't lose the reputation of our cook's army unit. Don't let the soldiers, when they eat your dish, say in disgust, 'What kind of rubbish is this?' If that happens, not only will you guys lose face, but Wei Dafu, will also lose face. So, all of you better do your best." Wei Dafu yelled at the top of his lungs. The cooks all held their heads high, and their eyes sparkled with confidence. Especially Long Kai, that immature little fellow. He actually held his chest high, and his face was filled with excitement. "All right, Long Kai, you go and distribute the porridge to each camp. When you come back later, you will continue cooking. The rest of you, go back to your camps and prepare your dishes well. If I'm not satisfied with today's dish, I will use half a month's worth of firewood." Long Kai's face fell. Reluctantly, he followed a few strong cooks to carry the steaming hot wok and left the camp. Bu Fong clasped his hands behind his back and slowly turned around. He was about to lazily return to his ordinary camp. However, he was stopped by Wei Dafu. "Kid, I'm watching you. If your dish isn't chosen by any of the soldiers, you know the consequences. At that time, I will let you know the price of being arrogant with me, Wei Dafu." Wei Dafu shot a glance at Bu Fong and coldly snorted. Bu Fong was taken aback. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he looked at Wei Dafu as though he was looking at an idiot. He was too lazy to say anything, so he turned around and returned to his camp. There were so many ingredients in the camp. Although they were all ordinary ingredients, they were all complete. Vegetables and meat were all laid out on the ground. Picking out some ingredients that seemed to be of good quality, Bu Fong weighed them in his hand. Then, he began to pick up the wooden frame and set up the wok, preparing to cook. To Bu Fong, there was no such thing as meticulously prepared dishes or not meticulously prepared dishes. A chef who was confident in his craftsmanship would always be able to satisfy the taste of his customers and make them praise him endlessly. Holding the wooden handle, he casually spun the kitchen knife in his hand. Twirling the knife in his hand, Bu Fong's eyes fell on the ingredients he had picked out. Regarding these ordinary ingredients, Bu Fong didn't feel any pressure at all. The knife light flickered rapidly, shining under the illumination of the fire. Swish, 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 swish. Those ingredients were quickly processed by Bu Fong in just a few breaths. His meteor knife skill was really skillful, so processing these ingredients was a piece of cake for him. After processing the ingredients, Bu Fong began to prepare to cook. He first preheated the wok, then added the oil. This oil was just ordinary oil, and it didn't contain any spirit energy. It was really an extremely ordinary ingredient. The dishes cooked by the cook's army cooks were made with spirit energy ingredients. However, they were unable to preserve the spirit energy within the ingredients like Bu Fong could. It was very easy for the spirit energy within the ingredients to leak out. Even the chefs of large restaurants were unable to preserve the spirit energy within the ingredients, let alone these cooks. Bufang was already used to cooking using true energy. Even though this technique was more useful when cooking spirit energy ingredients, it did not make much of a difference to Bufang. This was because his mental energy was simply too strong. Even the slightest change in the ingredients would not escape his senses. The sound of stir-frying resounded in everyone's camp. In an instant, sparks and smoke rose into the sky, and the aroma of the dishes filled the entire cook's army unit. However, the cook's army unit didn't prepare too many dishes. Their main purpose was to make large portions. Because they needed large portions, it was more difficult to cook. Many of them were responsible for one dish, so they had to make a few dishes in total. The miserable cries of spirit beasts resounded in the camp. It was the sound of some low-grade spirit beasts being slaughtered and turned into dishes to nourish the soldiers' bodies. For the sake of this dish, the cook's army unit had pulled out all of their savings. This time, Bufang only made one dish. He was very fast, and it didn't take long for him to finish. He covered the dish in the big pot with a lid, and surprisingly, all the fragrance was kept inside. It didn't burst out like the others. After finishing everything, Bufang sat cross-legged on his bed, and he closed his eyes to rest. He started to think about the dish in his mind, and at the same time, he waited for the others to finish their dishes. Soon, the sound of the iron ladle colliding with the big iron wok resounded again. Bufang opened his eyes, and they were filled with excitement. His first real dish in the cook's army unit was finally going to be put to the test. However, Bufang wasn't worried in the slightest. He had absolute confidence in his culinary skills. Getting off his bed, Bufang lifted the big pot and walked out of his tent. Xiaobai was arranged by Bufang to stay in his tent, and he obediently stayed still. When they arrived at the front of the camp, several cooks were carrying a pot, and there were already several big pots in front of the camp. A rich fragrance was emitted from the pots, and it lingered in the cook's army unit's camp. Many cooks had ruddy faces, and their foreheads were filled with sweat. It was obvious that they were excited to finish their dishes. "Brat, walk faster. Everyone is waiting for you." Wei Dafu shot a glance at Bufang, and he said in a displeased tone. Compared to the others, Bufang's pot wasn't big. However, the others didn't pay much attention to it, because the soldiers didn't pay much attention to dishes made with ordinary ingredients. Since they were going to be wasted, the pot given to Bufang was on the small side. Faced with Wei Dafu's scolding, Bufang was still unhurried, and he lazily carried his pot to the group. Wei Dafu was even more displeased. He coldly snorted, and he looked at the others. "All right, prepare to serve the dishes." Just as Wei Dafu's voice faded, "Hey ha!" The cooks immediately shouted, and then they lifted the heavy pots and walked out of the camp. Chapter 287. The Third Corps of the Western Mystery Army was the weakest among the three armies of the Western Mystery Army. Compared to the elites of the First Army, the soldiers of the Third Corps were much weaker in terms of cultivation and willpower. However, the Third Corps of the Western Mystery Army was a well-trained army. The cooks of the cook's army unit carried pots that were steaming hot and emitted a rich fragrance. Within the pots were the delicious dishes that they had spent a lot of effort to prepare. Some of these dishes were made with precious ingredients, and some were made with the meat of precious spirit beasts. The purpose of these dishes was to allow the soldiers of the Third Corps to be in their best condition after eating them. Only then would they be able to face the upcoming battle in their best condition. Dong! The heavy pots were placed in the middle of the camp. Immediately, a rich fragrance spread out and permeated the surroundings of the camp. The armored soldiers in the camp curiously looked at the pots. Although they were curious, they didn't have any expectations. This made Wei Dafu, who had been secretly observing the expressions of the soldiers, a little angry. However, he was also helpless. The soldiers of the Third Corps were already sick of the dishes they had prepared. Although the dishes they had meticulously prepared tasted good, and perhaps because they hadn't eaten them many times, the soldiers would still be excited and curious about them. However, if they were ordinary dishes, the soldiers wouldn't feel anything when they saw them. Without any new ideas, the taste wouldn't be able to capture the taste buds of the soldiers. This was the helplessness of the cooks. The commander of the 3rd Corps, Zhu Yu, slowly walked toward Wei Dafu with his hands clasped behind his back. Beside him were a few armored adjutants. Wei Dafu's face was immediately filled with respect. He bowed to Wei Dafu and stood to the side. "Very good. You've worked hard. Distribute these dishes so that the soldiers can enjoy a good meal." Zhu Yu had a satisfied smile on his face. Although the cook's army unit's dishes were still the same, it wasn't easy to eat a good meal. Wei Dafu responded and then began to arrange for people to serve the dishes. The soldiers also rushed over and surrounded the pots. They excitedly began to order dishes. Wei Dafu and the others were very busy. These spirit qi dishes were very popular with the soldiers because they tasted good and could keep the true qi in their bodies full. How could they not like this kind of food? Bufang calmly looked at the group of soldiers who were like hungry wolves. He placed the small pot in his hand on the ground. The pot was still covered with a lid, so the smell of the dish could not be released at all. Just as Wei Dafu had said, the soldiers' gazes were all focused on the spirit energy dishes. No one was interested in Bufang's pot, which was an ordinary dish. Even the eyes of the soldiers did not land on the pot. The difference was too great. Wei Dafu had a smile on his face. From time to time, he would take a bowl of rice and serve it to the soldiers. From time to time, he would be in charge of patrolling. Looking at the bustling crowd, he could not stop smiling. His gaze fell on Bufang, who was standing in the corner. In front of Bufang was a pot. The pot was covered with a wooden lid, so the smell of the dish could not be released. Bufang stood alone in the corner, looking very shabby. "See, indeed, no one is interested. If no one eats your dish, I will settle the score with you when we return to the cook's army unit." Wei Dafu clasped his hands behind his back and walked to Bufang's side. Looking at Bufang's appearance, he suddenly sneered. The difference in competitiveness between ordinary dishes and spirit energy dishes was too great. There was no doubt about it. It could be seen from the intensity of the two dishes. Bufang glanced at Wei Dafu, who seemed to be a petty person intoxicated by success. The corners of his mouth curled up. He looked at the soldiers fighting over the dishes in the other pots, but his expression did not change. Even though the expressions on the soldiers' faces were very excited, Bufang could feel that there was not much joy in them. It was obvious they had already eaten these dishes. They were not looking forward to it. Moreover, the taste was not able to capture the excitement of their taste buds. Let them eat for a while longer. Otherwise, I'm afraid my dish will be snatched away. Bufang looked at Wei Dafu, who was about to leave with his hands behind his back, and said with a faint smile. His words were filled with confidence. Wei Dafu's body instantly stiffened. He sneered disdainfully. "You brat, you are really confident. However, there is a huge difference between the food cooked with spirit energy ingredients and the food cooked with ordinary ingredients. Your confidence is just like your ignorance." "Oh, ignorance?" The corners of Bufang's mouth instantly curled up. Then, he no longer paid attention to Wei Dafu. Instead, he used one hand to press on the wooden lid of the pot. With a forceful pull, he suddenly lifted the lid. Steaming hot air soared into the sky. The rising white steam was like an exploding mushroom cloud, spreading out with a loud bang. An extremely rich fragrance gushed out from the pot. It was like a volcano that suddenly erupted. It was as if a bomb had been thrown into the camp. Gulio, the fragrance was like a whirlwind. In an instant, the entire camp became silent. The movements of the soldiers fighting over the dishes all became sluggish. They smelled a very strange aroma. They had never smelled or appraised this aroma before, but this aroma stimulated their taste buds in an instant. The aroma was extremely rich. Bufang took in a deep breath. His face became slightly rosy. He looked at the dish in the pot with excitement and excitement. A spicy, numbing, rich, and fragrant smell gushed out from the pot and sprayed onto his face. Chunks of jelly-like tofu slightly trembled in the boiling soup. It was accompanied by a numbing and spicy fragrance. Mapo tofu. the fragrant and spicy mapo tofu. This was a very tasty dish. Just the fragrance alone was enough to make people swallow their saliva. The instant the wooden lid was lifted, the instant the fragrance gushed out, Wei Dafu's body stiffened. The fragrance that seemed to envelop the entire camp. What the hell? As expected, Wei Dafu secretly cursed in his heart. He raised his head and discovered that the soldiers, who were originally fighting over the spirit energy dishes, were all attracted over. This group of people slowly surrounded Buffon. Each and every one of them swallowed their saliva. Their faces were filled with excitement and desire. It smells so good. I have never smelled such a fragrant smell. What kind of dish is this? I have never eaten it before. Did the cook's army unit come up with a new dish? This spicy smell, this fragrance. Oh my God, my gluttonous bug is about to come out. I can't stand it anymore. The soldiers chattered among themselves. Their eyes lit up as they stared at the mapo tofu in front of Buffon. Their faces were filled with desire. This pot is so small. Could it be that this dish was made with ordinary ingredients? Some of the soldiers noticed that something was amiss. They were already familiar with the cook's army unit's routine. From the size of the pot, they could tell that it was a dish. A look of disappointment appeared on some of their faces. If it was just an ordinary dish, then their desire for it would be much weaker. Buffon was incomparably calm. If a dish wanted to attract people's attention, it must first rely on its fragrance. This was because fragrance was the first thing that the diners would come into contact with. It was the element that could stir the diners' hearts the most. The fragrance of the mapo tofu was absolutely fragrant. There were many dishes that were fragrant. However, since he wanted to improve the soldier's state of mind, spicy and fragrant dishes were the best. In the end, Buffon chose the mapo tofu. Although the quality of the ingredients used wasn't very good, the effects of the dish were pretty good. Buffon looked around at the soldiers who wanted to eat the mapo tofu, but were regretfully shaking their heads. The corners of his mouth curled up. He picked up an iron ladle and shook the mapo tofu. He scooped up a spoonful and poured it into a bowl. Steam rose from the bowl, and the fragrance of the mapo tofu wafted out. Buffon passed the bowl to the soldier closest to him and said calmly, "Have a taste." That soldier took the bowl subconsciously. It was obvious that he didn't want to reject Buffon's offer. Wei Dafu's eyes widened, and he roared in his heart. "Why did you take it? Where is your moral integrity? If you want to maintain your state of mind, you must eat dishes cooked with spirit energy ingredients." The soldier eagerly looked at the bowl in his hand. The rosy, tender, and spicy mapo tofu not only tickled his taste buds, but also attracted his vision. He used his trembling spoon to scoop up a spoonful of the tofu and blew on it. Then, under the gazes of the crowd, he poured the mapo tofu into his mouth. Chapter 288. The mapo tofu was mainly spicy, numb, refreshing, and fragrant. The moment the mapo tofu entered his mouth, the soldier's eyes immediately widened. He felt his scalp go numb in an instant, and all his hair seemed to be standing on end, while his pores opened wide. Oh my God, it was a different kind of feeling. It was as if 1,000 tiny hands were caressing his whole body. His mouth felt like it was filled with a fragrant balm. He lost all feeling in his lips, and his tongue felt like it was holding a piece of red-hot iron. This kind of feeling was simply indescribable. Gulp. He didn't even have the time to bite. As soon as he closed his mouth, that piece of mapo tofu, which was like a soldering iron, slid down his throat and into his stomach. It was as if his stomach had been set ablaze in an instant, and it emitted a sizzling sound. So spicy, but so refreshing. The soldier's eyes became moist. His lips were red, and his nose was red. He felt as if he had fallen into a volcano, and his body was boiling. His body was burning with desire. The surrounding soldiers looked at the fellow who had eaten the mapo tofu. They were curious about the taste of the mapo tofu, because it was so fragrant that they couldn't stop eating it. Most of the delicacies in the Western Mystery City were spicy, and this kind of spicy delicacy made it impossible for them to resist. However, because this delicacy was made with ordinary ingredients, they were somewhat hesitant. If this mapo tofu was made with ingredients that contained rich spirit energy, they would have fought over it without any hesitation. This taste, ugh, it's simply too refreshing. The soldier's mouth was numb, and he felt as if his tongue was tied up by the spiciness of the mapo tofu. The eyes of the surrounding soldiers suddenly lit up, and they swallowed their saliva. Then, they looked at the mapo tofu with the eyes of a hungry wolf. Who cared if it was a spirit energy delicacy or not? It looked so delicious. It would be a waste not to eat it. Give me a portion. I also want a portion. I love spicy delicacies the most. Hurry up. I'm dying of thirst. Clamorous voices rose and fell. The soldiers crowded in front of Bu Fong, and their faces were filled with excitement. After the first soldier tasted the mapo tofu, they finally couldn't endure it any longer. They could no longer resist the fragrance from before. Wei Dafu's expression immediately turned ugly. How could this group of people act like this? You're soldiers who are going to the battlefield. No matter how delicious this dish is, it's just an ordinary dish. It's not a spirit energy ingredient. So how can it improve your condition to the best? When they entered the battlefield, it was a matter of life and death. You can't do this. This is just a dish cooked with ordinary ingredients. Wei Dafu looked at the bustling soldiers and suddenly felt a little embarrassed. So he said, "Swish." Damn it. Awesome. As soon as Wei Dafu's words left his mouth, one of the soldiers near him immediately swallowed a piece of mapo tofu. Before he could even savor the taste, he let out a loud roar. That roar was accompanied by the spicy sauce in his mouth, which splattered onto Wei Dafu's face. A spicy and numb taste instantly spread out on Wei Dafu's face. What the F***CK? Wei Dafu's tears almost flowed out. The spicy taste stimulated his skin, and he felt a burning sensation. He retreated to the side, and he used his hands to rub his face, trying to get rid of the burning sensation. However, when he raised his head once again, the scene in front of him caused his mouth to open wide, and he could no longer conceal the shock in his eyes. The soldiers' faces were filled with happiness. They squinted their eyes and breathed heavily. They held the bowl in their hands, licked their rosy lips, and beads of sweat seeped out of the tip of their noses. Wei Dafu had never seen such a happy expression on the faces of these soldiers. Even if it was a dish that he cooked, these soldiers only felt that they liked it, but they couldn't reveal a happy expression. Could it be that tofu was really that delicious? Wei Dafu couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. After all, Bu Fong's bowl was a little small, and in just a short while the whole bowl of scalding mapo tofu was emptied. The soldiers who were high from eating the mapo tofu poured out the bottom of the bowl, and in the end, everything was swept clean. Bu Fong's bowl was surrounded by a large group of people, and the soldiers in the surroundings couldn't help but stretch out their heads to look at them. They were all curious as to what was going on here. When they saw the expressions of the soldiers, they were extremely shocked. There's actually something delicious here. What the F***CK? You bunch of bastards actually didn't invite us? F***CK? What do you mean? Did you finish eating? F***CK. You guys are crazy. How can you eat a dish made from ordinary ingredients with such relish? Do you guys want to die when you go to the battlefield? The entire camp immediately broke out into a heated discussion. However, the soldiers who had eaten Bu Fong's delicacies were immediately displeased. This was because they discovered a bone-chilling fact, and that was that they felt warm all over, as if they were filled with boundless energy. The true energy within their bodies flowed at a much faster speed than before. Their condition had actually reached its peak. It was as though they had eaten a spirit energy dish. It was inconceivable. The soldiers who had finished licking the bottom of the bowl looked at Bu Fong with sparkling eyes. In an instant, they became incomparably hot. Using ordinary ingredients, he was actually able to make such a delicious dish that could even improve one's condition. When did such an awesome chef appear in the Cook's Army unit? Wei Dafu clenched his teeth, and the cooks around him also furrowed their brows as they looked at Bufang. Because of Bufang's dish, all the soldiers were attracted to it, and the dishes that they had meticulously prepared were now ignored. Perhaps the people who were eating the dish didn't even pay attention to it, and they became somewhat absent-minded. The attitude of these soldiers was a disrespect to their culinary skills, and they were extremely unhappy. "What are you doing? What are you doing? It's just a meal, and you guys are acting as though you're going to war? Am I being too lenient with you guys?" Commander Zhuyu immediately put on a stern face and walked over with his hands clasped behind his back. He furrowed his brows and looked at the noisy soldiers, who seemed to be in a market, and he scolded them in dissatisfaction. When the commander opened his mouth, the soldiers obediently quieted down, and they all chose other spirit energy dishes. Even the soldiers who had eaten the mapo tofu were the same. After all, there wasn't much mapo tofu to begin with, and they had only tasted it. It was impossible for them to eat until they were full. However, after eating the mapo tofu, the complexions of the soldiers who had eaten the spirit energy dishes became somewhat unsightly, and they looked as though they were chewing wax. "Bah, what is this thing? It's so disgusting. Is this food meant to be fed to pigs? It's so disgusting. This spiciness is just like plain water. Have the cook's culinary skills become so weak? The dishes are getting more and more disgusting." After the soldiers ate a mouthful of the spirit energy dishes, they couldn't help but start muttering. Although their voices weren't loud, the cooks of the cook's army unit heard them. Wei Dafu was so angry that his face became somewhat crooked. He had already cooked so meticulously, but in return, he was criticized for what? "Why are you guys so arrogant?" Was it because they ate a bowl of mapo tofu? Wei Dafu wasn't the only one who felt this way. The complexions of the cooks didn't look too good. They all thought of the reason, and they all looked at Bufang with unkind gazes. Bufang didn't panic at all, and he didn't care about the vicious gazes of the people around him. "The dishes I made were delicious. Are you blaming me? Why don't you want to eat? If you don't want to eat, then quickly pack up and prepare to set off," Zhuyu said coldly as he ate a mouthful of rice and swept his gaze over the soldiers, whose faces were filled with disdain. After the commander spoke, the soldiers unwillingly started eating. After all, on the battlefield, people were like iron and food was like steel. If they didn't eat their fill, they would all die. Wei Dafu's chest heaved up and down violently, and the faces of the cooks around him trembled as they walked over. The cooks who cooked the dishes were all experienced cooks in the cook's army unit. Now that they were humiliated, they were somewhat dissatisfied with Bufang. A group of people surrounded him, and they actually formed a formless pressure. They wanted to make Bufang bow his head. They wanted to let Bufang know what it meant to respect his seniors. He was just a newbie, and he wanted to ascend to the heavens. Chapter 289. Bufang calmly put away the pot on the ground and slowly covered it with a wooden lid. He paid no attention to the cold gazes of the cooks around him. This group of cooks was furious. The dish that so many of them had painstakingly cooked was actually suppressed by a dish made from ordinary ingredients by a kid in front of them. This was simply a slap to their faces. However, they couldn't make things difficult for him at this moment. After all, they were still in the military camp, and Commander Zhu was not far away. If they wanted to deal with Bufang, they would have to wait until they returned to the cook's army unit's camp. Thus, all the cooks coldly snorted and looked at Bufang with malicious gazes. Wei Dafu was shocked in his heart. However, this shock only lasted for a moment before it was replaced by coldness. The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. This was a very reasonable saying. The brilliance displayed by Bufang had already caused many people to fear him. In the future, in the cook's army unit, Bufang's life would become more and more difficult. It might even reach the point where it would be difficult for him to move an inch. However, to Bufang, this was not the slightest bit of interest. Knitting his brows, Bufang ignored those sharp gazes. He picked up the pot and walked out of the military camp. Since his dish had already been eaten, he had a reason to return to his tent. Wei Dafu felt a burning pain on his face. Previously, he had said that if no one ate Bufang's dish, he would severely punish Bu Fong when he returned. However, the result was such a sharp slap to his face. Not only did Bu Fong's dish get eaten, but it was also the first dish that was snatched up. Comparing oneself to others would always inadvertently infuriate others to death. That kid's dish, is it really that delicious? Wei Dafu's heart was somewhat shaken. Bu Fong carried the pot back to his camp. He stretched his waist and sat cross-legged on his bed. Looking at the other ordinary ingredients that did not contain any spirit energy, he couldn't help but furrow his brows. He was imagining how he would cook his next dish. While he was thinking about these things, the mealtime in the military camp had also ended. The cook's army unit had all returned. The atmosphere in the camp suddenly became a little awkward. Long Kai was the latest person to come to Bu Fong's camp. He had kindly come to remind Bu Fong that Bu Fong's dish was really in the limelight this time, causing many old cooks' skills to be neglected. Now, they might come to find trouble with Bu Fong. However, Bu Fong's reaction made Long Kai speechless. That was because Bu Fong was not worried at all. He was still sitting cross-legged on the bed, not panicking at all. A group of people swarmed over, and Wei Dafu also followed behind them with his hands clasped behind his back. They all squeezed into the tent where Bu Fong was. What kind of smell is this? The smell of mold. What kind of delicious dish can be made in such a broken place? TSK, TSK, TSK. Look, these vegetables seem to be rotten, and the stench is so strong. There is actually someone who dares to use this kind of ingredient to cook. Simply shameless. Where's your moral integrity? What if the soldiers' stomachs are spoiled by a dish made in such a dirty and messy environment? This group of people squeezed into Bu Fong's tent and started to chatter incessantly, trying to find fault with Bu Fong. They all disliked Bu Fong. Bu Fong was a newcomer, a junior. However, their culinary skills were crushed by a junior. This made all of their faces somewhat ugly. Long Kai was a little angry, but he was also a little helpless. Although he was young, he had been in the cook's army unit for a long time. He had long heard about the attitude of these cooks who took advantage of their seniority. However, this was the first time he had seen it for himself. He felt a little disgusted. The faces of these people gave him goosebumps. Bu Fong was staying in a camp where ordinary ingredients were piled up. Ordinary ingredients lacked spirit energy, so their preservation was naturally much worse than those with spirit energy. It was normal for them to rot. Why did these people come here to act like they were pretentious? Was it because the dishes cooked by Bu Fong were accepted by most of the soldiers? It was easy for a person's mentality to be unbalanced. Once their mentality was unbalanced, they would do all kinds of disgusting things. Bu Fong indifferently swept his gaze over this group of people. There was not the slightest fluctuation of emotions in his eyes. He just looked at them indifferently. Looking at them. The group of cooks who were chattering nonstop couldn't help but shut their mouths and look at Bu Fong. Bu Fong's imposing manner was indescribably strong, and it made them cower a little. Wei Dafu walked out of the crowd and stood in front of them. He looked at Bu Fong in a bad mood. "Brat, I admit that your culinary skills are very strong. However, you can't be too arrogant here. This will make us feel uncomfortable. If we feel uncomfortable, then don't even think about feeling comfortable. Do you understand?" Wei Dafu said. "What does your discomfort have to do with me? The purpose of a chef is to cook delicacies that can make people happy, not to cook delicacies that can please you. Moreover, who do you think you are? Why should I care whether you feel comfortable or not?" Bu Fong expressionlessly said. This was the first time he encountered such an unreasonable group of people. He only cooked a delicious dish that attracted the attention of the soldiers and became the most popular dish. Yet, this group of jealous people wanted to suppress him. Was the imperial city's black-hearted owner Bu that easy to suppress? Now, except for Long Kai, the rest of you should get out of my camp. Otherwise, Bu Fong let out a sigh of relief. Xiao Bai, who was standing in the corner of the tent, had his mechanical eyes flicker with a red light. He glanced at the group of cooks who had malicious intentions on their faces. "Damn it, this brat is really too arrogant. I can't stand it. I want to kill him." A burly man wearing a linen military uniform and an apron walked out from the crowd. He was the strongest among the cooks. Although his culinary skills weren't the best, his physique and cultivation were the strongest. This person walked in front of Bu Fong and slapped the table in the tent, almost breaking it into pieces. Since someone had stepped out, the others also clamored with righteous indignation. They all glared at Bu Fong. Why should the dishes they cooked with great effort be suppressed by this brat's dish that wasn't made of spirit energy ingredients? That kind of trash dish, what right did he have to suppress their dishes? Long Kai's young and tender face became somewhat pale. He looked at the group of people who had become aggressive with fear, and he shrunk back towards Bu Fong's location. At this moment, Bu Fong and Long Kai were like passengers on a small boat that was floating in the wind and waves. The anger of the cooks was like a vast ocean. When the waves rolled over, they wanted to overturn their small boat and completely suppress Bu Fong. I've said it before, don't cause trouble in my tent. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite. Bu Fong stood up from his bed, and his tone became somewhat impolite. The burly cook glared at him and took a step forward. He reached out his hand to grab Bu Fong's collar. This kind of newcomer who didn't know how to respect others should be taught a good lesson. He actually dared to steal the limelight of his seniors. Bu Fong was stunned. He raised his slender palm and lightly patted the burly cook's palm. Instantly, the burly cook's palm was slapped away. With a crisp slap, the burly cook felt as though his palm had become swollen. Intense pain continuously surged out, causing him to break out in a cold sweat. Xiaobai, strip this group of troublemakers and throw them out, Bu Fong calmly said. Then 2 red lights shone behind Bu Fong. Xiaobai's clone appeared. As the red lights flickered, it looked at the surrounding cooks. Trying to act mysterious. Is a mere broken puppet the reason for you to be so arrogant? Wei Dafu disdainfully snorted. Xiaobai was very ordinary. Wei Dafu had been in the cook's army unit for many years and had seen many puppets like Xiaobai. Because they had to come into contact with many new sects, there was a type of sect that specialized in producing puppets, just like the one beside Bu Fong. However, this kind of puppet didn't have much lethality, so Wei Dafu wasn't worried at all. However, what made Wei Dafu feel astonished was that just as his voice faded away, the sound of clothes being torn resounded in the air. Rip! A crisp sound rang out. Then a white silhouette flew out. The sound of a heavy object landing on the ground resounded outside the door. Everyone was stunned. Then, they turned their heads to look outside the tent. There was a burly man whose clothes had been stripped off. He covered his lower body and trembled as he stood up. Bu Fong calmly raised the corners of his mouth, patting Xiaobai's plump belly. He climbed back onto his bed and sat cross-legged. His gaze was still as calm as a leisurely cloud. Chapter 290. You? How dare you? Wei Dafu looked at the burly man who was stripped naked and thrown out of the tent. His heart trembled, and his face revealed a look of disbelief. How could he dare to throw him out? Why did he have to throw him out? It was the first time he met such an unreasonable newcomer. It was the first time he met such an arrogant newcomer. Wei Dafu was furious. He felt like he had been slapped in the face. The iron lump brought by Bu Fong did not care about his feelings at all. The burly man fell outside the tent and stood up shakily. His face was a mix of green and red. He was so depressed that he almost vomited blood. What the hell? He actually stripped someone? Was there a need to be so insane? You brat. Just you wait. The burly man looked at Bu Fong, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed. He wanted to spit out some harsh words, but he felt a red light sweeping toward him. His buttocks trembled, and he looked at the iron lump in fear. Even though he was a chef from the cook's army unit, he still had some cultivation. He was a soldier who could fight on the battlefield with a knife and a spear. However, when faced with the iron lump, he did not even know what happened. He was stripped naked and thrown out of the tent. Being stripped naked was not scary. The important thing was that he did not even know how he was stripped naked. The tent was silent for a moment. Then, a series of questioning voices rang out. The faces of the cook's army unit were filled with anger. This newcomer actually dared to fight back? Did he really think that he could cook a few delicious dishes and become complacent? He actually dared to attack an old man. Brat, are you courting death? You actually dared to attack us seniors? Oof. A newcomer is a newcomer. He actually dared to attack us. Do you want to chop firewood for the rest of his life? This arrogant newcomer needs to be taught a lesson. Otherwise, he will never know how to respect his seniors. The incessant, questioning voices resounded in the tent. Buffon could not help but open his eyes. He frowned and revealed a trace of annoyance. If you are so noisy, strip and throw them out, Buffon said indifferently. His voice was extremely cold, and he wasn't polite to these people at all. Someone was amused by Buffon. This brat's tone was too arrogant, wasn't it? Does he really think that there's no one here who can deal with him? A fierce look appeared on their faces. With a roar, they charged toward Buffon. However, they soon discovered that something was amiss. They felt as though they were riding on the clouds, and they were thrown into the air. Their figures drew a beautiful arc in the air, and the scenery in front of them, which was supposed to be moving forward, was actually moving backward. Bang! A series of heavy objects fell on the ground. The two men who intended to deal with Buffon were also stripped and thrown out of the tent. Another two naked figures climbed up from the ground awkwardly. Wei Dafu's expression slightly froze. How dare you? Just as he was about to question him, he discovered that the red-eyed lump of metal had unknowingly appeared in front of him. It grabbed him by the collar and threw him away. His body spun in the air, and his clothes were stripped as he spun in the air. I've been stripped naked. Damn it. Bang. Wei Dafu was dumbfounded. He was dumbfounded from the beginning until the end. Only when he fell to the ground and felt an intense pain did he realize that he had been stripped and thrown out of the tent. Everyone in the tent was chattering and cursing at this moment. They were like drakes whose throats had been grabbed. Their eyes widened, and their faces were filled with shock. Wei Dafu, Captain Wei, the person with the highest qualifications in the cook's army unit, the person with the best culinary skills, was actually thrown out by Buffon's iron puppet. Moreover, he was also stripped. Everyone's body trembled. Long Kai's eyes were filled with excitement. Wei Dafu crawled up from the ground and covered his crotch. He was flustered and exasperated, and his eyes were filled with resentment. Stinking brat, you have guts. From today onwards, you will obediently stay in this ordinary ingredients camp. Don't even think of touching a single spirit energy ingredient. Long Kai, what are you laughing at? Do you also want to stay in this ordinary ingredients camp? Wei Dafu was so angry that he stomped his feet. However, he didn't dare to make any big movements, so he looked quite comical. Long Kai wanted to laugh, but didn't dare to. Scram! Buffon opened his eyes, which were filled with impatience. Ever since he joined the cook's army unit, Wei Dafu had been constantly going against him. Buffon was a little confused. What was this guy trying to do? However, it wasn't important anymore. Buffon was a little impatient and didn't give him any face. The group of people in the tent retreated like a receding tide. They knew that they couldn't use force to deal with Buffon because that iron puppet was too strong. However, if force didn't work, then they would isolate him and isolate him. Everyone was ordered not to have any contact with Buffon, to be isolated from the army. This was a very scary thing for many people. However, it didn't matter to Buffon. Long Kai gave Buffon a worried look before leaving the tent. Very quickly, the atmosphere in the tent became cold and cheerless. Dang, dang, dang. The sound of a wok being knocked resounded. Then, Wei Dafu's ice-cold voice spread throughout the entire camp. Let's move out. Hurry up and gather for me. Carry your equipment and bring your tools. We are leaving. Rustling, rustling, a messy but somewhat orderly voice rang out. Then, one figure after another came out of the tent. These people all carried a black iron wok on their back and lined up in the camp. In the beginning, they asked Buffon to carry the wok, but Buffon refused. He could totally store this black wok into the system's storage space. However, because of this training mission, the system's storage space seemed to have been sealed. It didn't allow him to use the ingredients in the system's storage space. This was a headache for Buffon. Therefore, he could only follow the cook's army unit and carry the wok out of the tent. They gathered in the camp and lined up. When the cook's army unit set out, because they were in charge of cooking, they carried the black wok with them. When they set up camp, they directly set up a stove and cooked on the spot. Wei Dafu also carried a wok on his back. His expression was grim as he scanned the crowd. When he saw Bu Fong carrying the same wok, his expression darkened and he snorted. With the sound of a bugle horn, the cook's army unit also carried the black wok and pushed the baggage out of the camp. They met up with the 3rd Corps of the Western Mystery Army and headed out of the Western Mystery City. This time, not only the 3rd Corps of the Western Mystery Army, but also the main force of the Western Mystery Army, the 2nd Corps, left the Western Mystery City and headed to the nearest big city to provide support. This was because the Western Mystery City had received a request for help from other big cities. In the letter, the enemy was described to be extremely terrifying, and 2 of the Western Mystery Army had been dispatched. After all, the Western Mystery City was the largest city in the Northwest, and it was also one of the 3 great ancient cities. They had to uphold the order of the Light Wind Empire in the Northwest. It was their responsibility to wipe out the enemy. On the vast plains, a long and narrow army was marching slowly. This army was divided into a long line, and each position was occupied by a different soldier. The cook's army unit was at the back of the army, carrying the black wok on their backs as they advanced with difficulty. The scorching sun bloomed in the sky, sprinkling its scorching rays down. The whole plain seemed to be evaporating from the heat. Many people felt the scorching heat and found it unbearable. Bu Fong carried the wok, while Xiao Bai followed behind him. He was a little far away from the army. Due to the incident the day before, the cook's army unit, except for Dragon Fong, did not interact with Bu Fong and completely isolated him. They wanted to take revenge on Bu Fong and drive Bu Fong crazy in the cook's army unit. Every time Long Kai chatted with Bu Fong, he would be glared at by Wei Dafu. Then, Long Kai would run away dejectedly. Only Wei Dafu was left behind, looking at Bu Fong with a sneer. Bu Fong felt that this Wei Dafu was a lunatic. Creak, creak. The wheels of the carriages loaded with supplies made heavy sounds as they moved along the road. However, the army was still marching forward. When the pitch-black curtain of night hung high in the sky, 2 crescent moons mischievously poked their heads out. With a command, the soldiers stopped moving forward and began to set up camp. The cook's army unit began to get busy. They quickly set up the tents, set up the wok racks, and began to cook. Bu Fong was at the back. Watching the cook's army unit quickly set up the tents and the wok racks, a trace of astonishment appeared on his face. These people were worthy of being the cook's army unit. They were experienced, and it was easy for them to do such things. Bu Fong also set up the tent, set up the wok racks, and prepared to cook. However, when the cook's army unit began to cook and smoke curled up from the chimneys, the other soldiers were resting and conserving their energy. Along with the rustling of the surrounding bushes, there seemed to be some sounds coming from the surrounding bushes. This caused the surrounding soldiers to panic. One of the soldiers went forward to investigate, and just as he pushed aside the bushes, a figure appeared in front of him. A ferocious wolf howl resounded. Then, a huge figure pounced forward and bit the soldier who was investigating. Chapter 291. Above the vast northwest plains, a sharp sword light flowed. Then, with a speed as swift as a clap of thunder, it flew out at an extremely fast speed. With a clattering sound, the beam of light from the sword dissipated, revealing a figure on a sword. This figure had sword-like eyebrows and bright eyes. His eyes were as bright as the stars. He hovered in the air on his sword and squinted his eyes as he gazed at the boundless northwest plains. We're almost at the Western Mystery City. The Great Elder arranged for me to come to the aid of the Western Mystery City. Could it be that such a terrible thing will happen in the Western Mystery City? The reappearance of Ashura's sect is really unexpected. Tang Yin's white robe fluttered in the wind as he gazed into the distance. Then, with a flash of light from his sword, he continued to fly forward. The Light Wind Empire was in chaos. Countless cities were embroiled in war. The bloody war had caused the deaths of countless soldiers. The sky was overflowing with resentment. As a major sect in the southern region, the Celestial Arcanum sect in Wuliang Mountain could not sit idly by. Moreover, an elder from the godly temple of the Wildlands had fallen in the Light Wind Empire. This was a shocking news to the godly temple of the Wildlands. That elder had a supreme being physical body and an extremely powerful cultivation level. He was a half-step supreme being. Since such an expert had fallen in the Light Wind Empire, how could the godly temple of the Wildlands not pay attention to it? The godly temple of the Wildlands sent people to investigate and discovered that the Light Wind Empire had fallen into internal strife. This internal strife seemed to be orchestrated by someone. When they discovered this, they were ambushed. Several of the 7th grade battle saints from the godly temple of the Wildlands were killed in the ambush. Only a few of them managed to escape in a sorry state. However, because they managed to escape, they managed to bring back the shocking news. The Shura sect, which had been annihilated 1,000 years ago, had reappeared and even led a war against the Light Wind Empire. Although no one knew what they were plotting, with the evil nature of the Shura sect, they were definitely up to no good. All the major powers in the southern region had received the news from the godly temple of the Wildlands. Therefore, they sent their powerful disciples to assist the Light Wind Empire. King Yu's forces had the help of the Shura sect, while the other major powers sent their experts to assist the Light Wind Empire's emperor. For a moment, the two sides were evenly matched. "It's a ground wolf!" With a cry of alarm, the soldiers of the Western Mystery Army's 3rd Corps roared and surrounded the giant wolf that had rushed out of the ground. This kind of ground wolf lived underground and moved very fast. To them, the earth was like water to fish. It was a very rare type of Northwest spirit beast. They were rank 4 spirit beasts. Their fighting strength was not strong, but they could always surprise people and injure them. Furthermore, the bite force of this ground wolf was very strong. Once bitten, at least blood would be seen. For example, the soldier who was bitten almost had his entire arm dislocated. Fresh blood gushed out. After all, they were well-trained soldiers. They raised their weapons and stabbed at the ground wolves that were rushing out from the ground. For a moment, battle cries filled the entire army. As the commander of the 3rd Corps, Zhu Yu's expression was very ugly. They had only just set off, but they had already encountered such a troublesome spirit beast. It could be said that they were at a disadvantage. The ground wolves were quickly beaten back by the soldiers. One by one, they burrowed back into the ground. However, the soldiers became tense, and they could no longer relax. Ground wolf. Bufang's eyes slightly lit up. He looked at the ground wolf that was stabbed to death by the soldiers and began to study it with great interest. The other soldiers of the cook's army unit were busy protecting the supplies, so they did not notice him. The meat quality of this ground wolf was not bad. After Bufang flipped the body of the ground wolf, his eyes slightly narrowed. The meat of these underground wolves had been washed by the underground spirit energy, so it had a special feeling. Bufang raised his hand and patted the body of the ground wolf. He stood up and sighed regretfully. He could not use the system dimensional bag. Otherwise, he would have stored the body of the ground wolf in it. Although the grade of this ingredient was low, the meat quality was not bad. It should taste good when cooked. The ground wolves were beaten back, but the 3rd Corps was panicking. Although they managed to repel the ground wolves, many soldiers were injured. The camp was filled with mournful cries. This kind of unpredictable spirit beast was the hardest to control. However, no matter what, the march had to continue. The next day, the Western Mystery Army continued forward. However, this time, they encountered spirit beasts again. When they passed by a pile of rugged rocks, the usually lazy 4th grade wind speech snakes went berserk and attacked the soldiers. Many of the soldiers were seriously injured. Although the venom of these wind speech snakes was not strong, a bite from them would still make them weak for 3 to 5 days. They were also a type of spirit beast that gave people headaches. This time, the spirit beasts went berserk, causing the morale of the Western Mystery Army to drop a few notches. The commander of the 3rd Corps, Zhu Yu, had a bad feeling. These spirit beasts attacked the army for no reason. There was definitely something wrong. He had marched many times, and it was not the first time he encountered these spirit beasts. However, he had never seen a spirit beast that attacked the army first. However, he could not figure out what the problem was, so the army could only continue forward. However, after this, the Third Corps was attacked by several groups of spirit beasts. These spirit beasts were not of high grade, but there were many of them, and they were very difficult to deal with. The morale of the Western Mystery Army was completely depressed. The soldiers were all complaining and listless. On top of the Lust Mountain, a military flag was fluttering in the wind. Soldiers riding on spirit beasts were standing in a line. Among these soldiers, there was a sinister man wrapped in a black robe. The surrounding soldiers were very respectful toward this black-robed man. Senior Amni, if nothing unexpected happens, the Western Mystery Army will soon arrive at Mo Luo City. At that time, with Mo Luo City and the support of the Western Mystery Army, we will be in a very passive position, a general-looking soldier said with a frown. General Mo Lin, you are a general under King Yu's command. You have to relax. The Western Mystery Army will definitely have a pleasant surprise when they arrive here from the Western Mystery City. I have prepared many gifts for them. When they arrive at the foot of this cliff, the Western Mystery Army will be annihilated, the black-robed old man said with a sinister smile. Mo Lin's heart suddenly shuddered. He did not dare to be negligent. This black-robed old man was an expert with a cultivation level of 7th grade. With him overseeing the army, they should have been able to quickly conquer Mo Luo City. However, the sudden appearance of a 7th grade battle saint slowed down their attack. Only by conquering Mo Luo City would they be able to press on and attack the largest city in the northwest, the Western Mystery City. The Western Mystery City was obviously aware of the urgency of the situation, so they sent their army to support them. Report. The scouts at the front have reported that the Third Corps of the Western Mystery Army has already entered the vicinity of the cliff. Just as General Mo Lin and the black-robed elder were chatting, a scout quickly came to report. In an instant, Mo Lin and the elder's eyes lit up. Then, they mounted their horses and galloped forward, leading the soldiers in a mad dash. The Third Corps of the Western Mystery Army was currently in low spirits. After inexplicably experiencing so many spirit beast attacks, the soldiers' minds and bodies were greatly damaged. At this moment, they were in a very bad state. Zhu Yu also knew that the situation was troublesome, so he ordered them to set up camp. The Third Corps was already in a state of panic and had sent out many scouts to investigate. If there were more spirit beasts attacking, they would be able to prepare for it. We will reach Mo Luo City soon. Pass down the order. Let the cook's army unit prepare a good meal and raise everyone's mental state to its peak. Zhu Yu roared loudly. Then, the cook's army unit received the military order. Although Wei Dafu and the others were a little tired, they still had to keep their spirits up. This meal would affect their state of mind for the upcoming battle. Swoosh! A powerful arrow sped through the air. The sound of the bowstring snapping was like thunder. A scout who was scouting was instantly pierced through the head by the arrow. Blood splattered everywhere. Numerous arrows were shot out, and in an instant, the scouts were all killed by the rain of arrows. However, under this terrifying attack, a scout was drenched in blood. He quickly rode his horse toward the Western Mystery Army. There was an ambush here. The scout's heart trembled. After receiving the order, he started cooking. Bufong was also unhurriedly setting up a pot rack and starting a fire. After a while, smoke curled up from the kitchen. He was only in charge of cooking ordinary ingredients, so naturally, he didn't have to put in much effort. Zhu Yu stood in front of the camp, his brows tightly furrowed. Suddenly, his pupils shrank. In the distance, he saw a scout whose body was dripping with blood. The scout was riding a horse and rushing back. Chapter 292. Rumble. Steam rose from the wok, rising into the night and then dissipating in the air. Bufong opened the lid of the wok, and a fragrance within the wok spread out. This time, He was cooking a sour and spicy soup. Although Bu Fong didn't really care about it, there were only a few ingredients prepared for him in this cooking position, and there were only a few. Within the boiling hot sour and spicy soup, chunks of potatoes were rolling around, and the black and white mushrooms were bubbling up and down. The flame under the wok was still burning, but the soup was already cooked. He didn't extinguish the fire and just scooped a bowl of soup for himself. He walked to the side and took a sip. In the distance, the other members of the cook's army unit were also cooking diligently. They weren't in a good state at the moment. After rushing for an entire day, they were all on tenterhooks. Their nerves had been tense at the beginning, and they were now relaxed. As Bu Fong drank the delicious sour and spicy soup, he felt a warm energy flowing through his body. The night in the Northwest Plains was very cold, and the temperature had dropped drastically. After drinking this bowl of soup, he felt extremely comfortable. Long Kai dragged his exhausted body to Bu Fong's side. His nose twitched, and he smelled the boiling hot sour and spicy soup in the wok. His eyes instantly lit up. He scooped a portion of the soup and sat beside Bu Fong. He breathed in and drank the soup. The dishes of the cook's army unit were also ready and were distributed to the soldiers who had set up camp. The ingredients they used contained spirit energy, and after drinking it, one would feel full of energy. This was also the reason why the cook's army unit existed in the army. Zhu Yu's eyes widened as he stared at the scout who had arrived in front of him, but was now covered in blood and had collapsed in front of him. Zhu Yu's heart trembled as he lifted his head and looked at the pitch-black distance. That place seemed to have turned into the mouth of a demon. "Damn it, there's an ambush," Zhu Yu bellowed. His voice was wrapped with true energy and spread out. This caused the soldiers who were eating the food cooked by the cook's army unit to tense up. They stood up from their seats and quickly gathered together. One ray, two rays, then spirit beasts with scarlet eyes dashed out from the darkness. They charged toward the Western Mystery Army with a tyrannical and ruthless aura. Zhu Yu led his soldiers and took the lead to kill these spirit beasts. "It's those crazy spiritual beasts again. Damn it, what the hell is going on?" Zhu Yu was infuriated, and his movements became even more ferocious. With every slash of his sword, a spirit beast's head would be chopped off. These spirit beast cultivations were not strong, but they couldn't rely on numbers. All of a sudden, Zhu Yu seemed to hear the sound of a bowstring being pulled. An arrow filled with boundless energy shot out from the darkness. Its speed was extremely fast, as though it wanted to tear through the air, instantly piercing through Zhu Yu's head. At the critical moment, Zhu Yu roared and blocked the arrow. "Arrows! There's an enemy!" Zhu Yu's heart trembled. Then, from the darkness, came a series of blood-curdling screams. That enemy actually dashed out at this moment. This was the moment when the soldiers were the most relaxed. This was the moment when the soldiers were tormented by the spirit beasts. Zhu Yu didn't dare to imagine the consequences of this enemy's attack. The hooves of the spirit beasts stomped on the ground, causing the ground to shake violently. Numerous armored soldiers charged out from the darkness. Their battle cries were accompanied by the waving of their flags, which resounded throughout the entire valley. The Third Corps of the Western Mystery Army finally clashed with this group of enemies who had suddenly attacked them. Zhu Yu's killing intent surged. Sure enough, this group of people was behind all this. All the spirit beasts they encountered along the way were definitely controlled by this group of people. Zhu Yu had always been sullen, and at this moment, all of his accumulated grievances were released. Although he was exhausted, he didn't hesitate to kill the enemies. The battle broke out in an instant. In an instant, blood flowed like a river. Fresh blood splattered everywhere, and a thick stench of blood permeated the entire valley. Bu Fong and Long Kai were drinking their sour, spicy soup when they suddenly felt the ground shake. A battle actually broke out in front of them without any warning. The sound of blades colliding resounded incessantly. "Is this a battle?" Long Kai was alarmed. "It should be." Bu Fong drank a mouthful of the sour, spicy soup, and his eyes flickered with uncertainty. The Western Mystery Army had experienced numerous spirit beast attacks, and their morale was already low. How could they be a match for this group of enemies? It seemed like the Western Mystery Army was in danger. Mo Lin held his long spear, and his face was filled with excitement. Although this army was the weakest of the Western Mystery Army, if they could kill this army, it would still be a great achievement. With a sweep of his spear, a soldier was cleaved in half. Hot blood splattered everywhere, and Mo Lin was extremely excited. On the top of the cliff, the eyes of the black-robed elder flickered, and he muttered some incantations. He actually began to draw a magic array. The magic array was very complicated and strange. Although it was complicated, it didn't take too much time to draw. When a magic array was formed, 5 blood-colored jade talismans floated up and formed the magic array. Suddenly, a suction force burst out from the magic array. Then, accompanied by the battle cries from the valley, a white and gray energy was released from the magic array. The white and gray energy was actually a blurry figure. Some were struggling and roaring, and some were wantonly roaring. These were the soul essences of the soldiers who had died in battle. These souls carried the anger and unwillingness of these soldiers before they died, and their resentment was extremely heavy. Ha ha! Kill, kill! The more the better. The Shura sect warrior wrapped in a black robe was extremely excited, and he couldn't help but laugh loudly. Suddenly, his laughter came to an abrupt end. He looked into the distance and saw that in the dark sky, a sharp sword light was rapidly approaching. Shura, sect demon, come out and meet your death. The sword light dissipated in the void, then turned into a sky full of sword rain, pouring down and killing the enemies in a small area. Tang Yin's eyebrows were like swords, and his eyes were like stars. He walked in the air, and a long sword rotated in the void. Then he held it in his hand. Being able to walk in the air meant that he had already stepped into the realm of 7th grade battle saint. His cultivation level was advancing very quickly. With Tang Yin's participation, the Western Mystery Army's morale was immediately boosted, and they actually began to counterattack. Mo Lin solemnly looked at Tang Yin, who was floating in the void. In the past, battle saints were rarely seen, but now, there was an endless stream of them. This was an unprecedented war for the Light Wind Empire. Damn it, it's those people from the Celestial Arcanum sect again. Is it those forces from the southern region again? They want to stop the rise of our Shura sect again? Dream on. All of you die. The eyes of the elder, shrouded in a black robe, suddenly burst forth with a bloody glow. Then, his figure burst forth and actually stepped on the air as well. He swung his claw toward Tang Yin, who was floating in the air. This claw was ferocious and turned into a bloody glow that circulated around it. Tang Yin was not the least bit afraid. He also raised his sword and began to fight with the elder. The battle was very fierce. The whole valley seemed to be soaked in blood, and it sent chills down people's spines. Bufong puzzledly looked at Tang Yin, who was holding a sword and fighting in the sky. His eyebrows suddenly twitched. He didn't expect to meet an old friend here. However, looking at Tang Yin's condition, it seemed that he couldn't defeat the black-robed elder. After all, Tang Yin broke through too late. The battle lasted from night until dawn. Tang Yin's condition wasn't good, and he was sent flying back with a pale face. Zhu Yu also shouted for retreat, so the Western Mystery Army finally chose to retreat from the valley. The army retreated one after another, and the cook's army unit escorted the rations as they retreated. In the void, the black-robed elder's eyes flickered with an ominous glint, and he shouted, "Chase after them! Kill them all! Retreat!" How could he let such a fat piece of meat escape from his mouth? If he could annihilate this Western Mystery Army, he would have accomplished half of the task given to him by the High Priestess. At that time, when he conquered Mo Luo City, he would have collected enough spiritual essences and souls, which would be one step closer to the rise of the Shura sect. Therefore, he didn't want the Western Mystery Army to retreat. He had fought a few battles with the Celestial Arcanum sect's experts, and they were no match for him. Therefore, he wasn't afraid. Mo Lin's eyes were filled with excitement. He brandished his weapon and chased after the Western Mystery Army while shouting. He didn't want to give up this opportunity to gain merit. Tang Yin was enraged. This Shura sect devil wanted a foot after being given an inch. The Western Mystery Army, which was forced into a desperate situation, once again engaged in a fierce battle with the enemy. Therefore, another battle broke out outside the valley. However, this time, Tang Yin was heavily injured in exchange for the retreat of the Western Mystery Army's Third Corps. The Western Mystery Army's Third Corps, which had set up camp in a different place, was in a miserable state. They had also lost about half of their rations during the emergency retreat. With their rations running low, Wei Dafu could only look for Bu Fong with a gloomy face. He didn't have many spirit energy ingredients left, so he could only use ordinary ingredients to make up for it. Wei Dafu felt his face burning with pain, but this time, Bu Fong didn't want to talk nonsense with him, so he directly agreed to cook. Long Kai stayed by Bu Fong's side as his assistant. After Wei Dafu left, the two of them started to prepare to cook a large wok of dishes that could support many people. This was also Bu Fong's first time cooking such a large wok of dishes. Chapter 293. In the rocky campsite, the shadows of tents overlapped, and the cooking fire rose in spirals. Under the radiance of dawn, it seemed somewhat lonely. Inside the tent, Tang Yin sat cross-legged with a pale face. The true energy around his body fluctuated and constantly surged, healing his internal injuries. Even though he had just broken through to 7th grade battle saint, he was still not a match for the warrior of the Shura sect. After a long while, the true energy was stirred and returned to his body. Then, Tang Yin spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face became even paler. I didn't expect the cultivation level of the Shura sect to be so strong. Tang Yin's face was pale as a trace of worry surfaced in his eyes. If he couldn't stop the Shura sect warrior, the entire Mo Luo city, or even the Western Mystery City, would fall into the hands of those demons. At that time, rivers of blood would flow. He didn't know much about the Shura sect, but Yin had told him some things about the Shura sect. This sect had stepped into the southern region from the outside 1,000 years ago. At that time, it was a disaster for the southern region. This was because if one wanted to cultivate the Shura sect's cultivation method to the peak, they needed countless spiritual essences and souls, and the acquisition of spiritual essences and souls could only be obtained through slaughter. At that time, the Shura sect master was extremely powerful and dominated the southern region. The Celestial Arcanum sect of the Wuyang Mountain, the Clear Sky Pagoda of the 100,000 Mountains, the Godly Temple of the Wildlands, the White Cloud Villa of the Illusory Spirit Swamp, and other forces had to join forces to eliminate the Shura sect that had plagued the southern region. No one would have thought that this terrifying force would be revived. Moreover, from their actions, there was no doubt that they were doing this for their cultivation. To instigate a war, absorb so many spiritual essences and souls, and cause countless lives to be lost, was just for their cultivation. This was simply too cruel. The Shura sect has been keeping a low profile these days. They only instigated a war between the empires, but war is also the most dangerous thing to do. After a war, the amount of spiritual essences and souls they collected will definitely be considerable. Perhaps they also wanted to keep a low profile and recover. However, they killed a half-step supreme being of the wildlands. This is simply reaping what they sowed. Now that they've been discovered, it's possible that both sides will perish. Hopefully, this sect still has some conscience and won't massacre the entire city. Tang Yin opened his eyes and sighed. Tang Yin stopped cultivating. Zhu Yu, who had been standing outside the tent, walked in with a respectful expression. After all, Tang Yin was a 7th grade battle saint. Many thanks for senior's help, Zhu Yu said. Tang Yin waved his hand. He had only received an order from the Great Elder. Currently, many experts from the various factions have been sent out, and he was the only one sent to assist Mo Luo City. Yin went to help the Western Mystery City. However, as an ancient city of the Light Wind Empire, the Western Mystery City was once the ancient capital of many empires. The Shura sect demons naturally did not dare to offend it too much. After all, the ancient city still had its own dignity. Commander Zhu, what's the situation in Mo Luo City? Tang Yin asked the question he was most concerned about. Once Mo Luo City was captured, the Western Mystery City would be isolated. When that time came, it would truly be in danger. I also did not receive a secret letter from the spies in Mo Luo City. However, Mo Luo City is near the territory of the 13 bandits of Majo. Even though they are bandits, if Mo Luo City is captured by King Yu's men, their territory will shrink by quite a bit. They won't have a good time either. Therefore, if they lend a hand, Mo Luo City might be able to hold out for a while. Zhu Yu analyzed. This was only his speculation. He did not know if the 13 bandits of Majo would lend a hand. The 13 bandits of Majo. Tang Yin had a slightly strange expression on his face. The first time he met the 13 bandits of Majo was in Onarbu's store. At that time, the cultivation level of the 13 bandits of Majo was merely a 6th grade battle emperor. However, he heard that after they returned from Onarbu's store, many of them had a breakthrough in their cultivation level. Currently, the 13 bandits of Majo was a major force in the Light Wind Empire. Senior, I've already sent people back to Western Mystery City to request for reinforcements. When the elites of the Western Mystery Army's First Corp arrive, these enemies will be nothing. Tang Yin nodded his head. However, he was a little disinterested. Suddenly, a fragrant aroma drifted in from outside the tent. Tang Yin's expression slightly changed. His nose slightly wrinkled, and his expression was a little surprised. How fragrant! Zhu Yu was also incomparably astonished. The appearance of this aroma was indeed a little sudden. Tang Yin walked out of the tent and stood at the entrance. He squinted his eyes and tilted his head as he sniffed the aroma. Commander Zhu, I didn't expect the culinary skills of the cooks of the Third Corps to be so good. Such a rich aroma. I have only smelled it in the Imperial City before. Tang Yin smiled as he said to Zhu Yu. The aroma of the dishes cooked by Owner Bu was the most fragrant he had ever smelled. He did not expect that he would be able to smell it in the army. For a moment, he became a little hungry. Zhu Yu immediately let out a loud laugh and invited Tang Yin to taste the delicacies. Long Kai's face was filled with intoxication as he stood at the side, dumbstruck. The aroma that permeated the air was so rich that it seemed as though it was going to materialize and envelop him. He had never smelled such a fragrant aroma before. It simply made all the pores on his body open up. In the distance, Bu Fong was holding a large iron ladle. There were 4 cauldrons surrounding him. Each of the cauldrons was burning with raging flames. The flames were surging and emitting scorching heat. Bu Fong was stirring the cauldrons with a large iron ladle. His true energy enveloped the iron ladle as if it was attached to his mental energy. Every time he stirred the cauldrons, he would control the taste of the ingredients in the cauldrons to the best. Because these ingredients were all ordinary ingredients, Bu Fong could only rely on adjusting the taste of the ingredients to enhance the taste. There were 4 cauldrons, and each of the cauldrons contained a different dish. However, they were all varied and contained almost all kinds of ingredients. Even though there were so many ingredients mixed together, the taste did not affect each other. Instead, it caused the aroma to be extremely rich. This was related to Bu Fong's cooking method. True energy cooking was able to adjust the true energy within the ingredients. For ingredients without true energy, the only thing that could be adjusted was the taste and taste. Under the control of true energy cooking, the taste of each ingredient would be independent and burst forth with a unique fragrance. When these fragrances were mixed in the air, they emitted an intoxicating fragrance. It was not an exaggeration to say that the aroma could spread for 10 miles. The aroma emitted from the 4 boiling cauldrons spread along with the morning breeze and blew across the entire camp. Tang Yin wasn't the only one who smelled it. Almost all the soldiers in the camp smelled it, and everyone was extremely surprised. Wei Dafu was a little sluggish. His hand that was holding the ladle stiffened as he smelled the aroma in disbelief. This aroma? Captain Wei, what are you guys cooking? This aroma is really fragrant. While Wei Dafu was in a daze, Zhu had already brought Tang Yin over with a face full of smiles. Zhu Yu was very satisfied in his heart. It seemed like this Wei Dafu had brought out his trump card. He knew how to use dishes to boost the morale of the soldiers when their morale was low. Not bad. He had a bright future ahead of him. Why was Commander Zhu here? Wei Dafu was startled. When he saw Zhu Yu walking over, he had an awkward expression on his face. He quickly stopped what he was doing and walked over. The aroma isn't coming from here. Tang Yin indifferently glanced at Wei Dafu and directly ignored him. Instead, he sniffed the aroma in the air and continued walking forward. An awkward expression flashed across Zhu Yu's face, and he also followed. It wasn't Wei Dafu? Then who else in the cook's army unit could have such good culinary skills? A trace of anger flashed across Wei Dafu's face. It was definitely that brat again. Tang Yin clasped his hands behind his back and walked at the front. Zhu Yu and Wei Dafu followed behind him. After passing by the tents, their eyes quickly lit up as they found the source of the aroma. The first thing that entered their eyes were 4 large woks. The woks that were continuously boiling under the flames attracted their eyes. Moreover, the aroma emitted from the woks was also somewhat intoxicating. Cooking with 4 woks at the same time. Captain Wei, when did you get such an amazing cook? Zhu Yu exclaimed in surprise. Cooking with 4 woks, and the aroma from each wok was still so strong. This skill was indisputable. Senior, let's go over and have a taste. This aroma is really tempting. Zhu Yu raised his head and said as he looked at Tang Yin. However, Zhu Yu's eyes narrowed. He discovered that Tang Yin's expression was a little strange. This was because Tang Yin's gaze was not on the 4 shocking cauldrons, nor was he attracted by the fragrance wafting out of the cauldrons. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the thin young man who was calmly walking around the 4 cauldrons with an iron spoon in his hand. Chapter 294. On top of the towering city walls of Mo Luo City, several figures were proudly standing there. Hu Yifeng was wearing a scholarly white robe, but his hair was in a mess. Beside him were the brothers of the 13 bandits of Mazhou. However, their numbers had decreased significantly. We, the 13 bandits of Mazhou, have never suffered such a huge loss before. If we were to flee with our tails between our legs, I would be letting down our deceased brothers. Hu Yifeng's eyes were bloodshot, and the vicious aura he exuded was somewhat incompatible with his attire. Of the 13 bandits of Mazhou, only 7 brothers were left. 5 of them had fallen on the battlefield and were killed by King Yu's troops. That black-robed expert from King Yu's troops. Even if I die, I will drag him to hell with me. Beside him, the remaining bandits all had mournful looks on their faces. The 7th master had lost an arm. As he looked at the oppressive army that was charging toward Mo Luo City, a hint of madness flashed through his eyes. Bufang did not notice Tang Yin's arrival. Instead, he continued to concentrate on cooking. His figure was very calm as he skillfully held onto the large ladle and stirred the 4 pots, causing the fragrance to surge out from the pots. Owner Bu? Senior Bu? Tang Yin's gaze was slightly dull and doubtful. He wondered if he was hallucinating. How could Owner Bu appear in the Northwest Territory? However, looking at the person who was as calm as ever and his proficient cooking skills, Tang Yin was certain that this person was Owner Bu. That was because Owner Bu's temperament was simply too obvious. Zhu Yu felt that Tang Yin's gaze was a little strange. He followed Tang Yin's gaze and saw the young man who was cooking. Wasn't he just a young man? Sir, his name is Bufang. He's the new cook. Wei Dafu slightly bowed and hurriedly said, This newcomer is a little arrogant and unruly, so he still needs to temper his temper a little. Let him stay in the cooking position for now. A newcomer? It is normal for a newcomer to be a little arrogant. However, this kid really has the ability to be arrogant. His skill is indescribable. Zhu Yu nodded his head. As he sniffed the fragrance that permeated the air, a look of admiration appeared on his face. However, when Tang Yin heard Wei Dafu's words, his expression became increasingly strange. He turned his head to look at Wei Dafu and indifferently said, Arrogant and unruly? Wetting your temper. That's right. Wei Dafu stuttered as he was stared at by Tang Yin. Tang Yin turned his head and coldly smiled. Then, he tidied up his clothes and solemnly walked toward Bufang. Zhu Yu and Wei Dafu looked at each other. A bad premonition surged in Wei Dafu's heart. Could it be that Senior knows that brat? Could it be that the kid is a junior that Senior knows? Wei Dafu's heart thumped, and a bitter expression appeared on his face. The four woks were all boiling. The ingredients inside were boiling and emitting steam. Suddenly, Bufang pulled out the iron ladle in his hand. With a twist of his hand, the lids of the four woks were covered, concealing the fragrance. After doing all this, Bufang raised his head and looked at the three people walking toward him. He knew both Wei Dafu and Zhu Yu. However, the one walking in front was even more familiar. Senior, what a coincidence. Tang Yin walked in front of Bufang and respectfully cupped his hands. Tang Yin had always been respectful toward Bufang. This youth was too mysterious and always gave people an unfathomable feeling. Say, Senior. When Wei Dafu heard how Tang Yin addressed Bufang, his legs immediately went soft and he almost fell on his butt. What the hell? You, a 7th grade battle saint, address this youth as Senior? Can't you speak properly? Zhu Yu also slightly opened his mouth. He was somewhat astonished. Could it be that Tang Yin recognized the wrong person? The youth in front of him didn't seem to have a high cultivation level. That's right. It is indeed a coincidence. Why are you here? Isn't this the army? Bufang looked at Tang Yin and calmly asked. The corner of Tang Yin's mouth twitched. Shouldn't I be the one asking you this? You're a chef. Why aren't you cooking in your own shop? What are you doing in the army? Because of some unavoidable reasons, I came to help out in the army. Why is Onorbu in the army? Moreover, in the army of Western Mystery City, which is quite far from the Imperial City, I came to experience what it feels like to be a chef in the army and enhance my culinary skills. This way, when I cook, I can focus more on different emotions. Bufang casually spouted nonsense. What he said was just a dignified reason on the surface. In fact, he just wanted to complete the task and obtain the reward. However, Tang Yin didn't understand. After listening to Bufang's words, he suddenly felt a surge of admiration from the bottom of his heart. It was no wonder that Onorbu's culinary skills could reach such a level. It turned out that he had been undergoing arduous culinary training in order to improve his culinary skills. Being a chef in the army was a tough job. In order to improve his culinary skills, Onorbu actually spared no effort to join the Cook's Army unit of the Western Mystery Army. This kind of spirit was simply a role model for his generation. As expected, if one wanted to achieve something in any profession, he would need to put in a lot of effort. The two of them were chatting happily. However, Zhu Yu and Wei Dafu's complexion became somewhat strange. Zhu Yu was still fine and was only a little suspicious. However, Wei Dafu's complexion had already turned pale. A chef, why would he be so familiar with a 7th grade battle saint? Since he knew such an existence, why did he join the Western Mystery Army? To make fun of us? What dish is Onorbu cooking? It smells so good. After chatting for a while, Tang Yin's gaze fell on the 4 big woks. A trace of excitement surged in his eyes. They aren't anything special. They're all made with ordinary ingredients, Bufang calmly said. These are prepared for the soldiers. After Bufang finished speaking, he opened the lid of the woks. Immediately, a surging fragrance gushed out. Ordinary ingredients? Tang Yin was taken aback. He walked toward the woks and looked inside. The ingredients in the woks were brightly colored. The dishes in each wok were different. However, one thing was clear. These were all ordinary ingredients. Even though the Cook's Army unit used ordinary ingredients to cook, it was rare. This was because ordinary ingredients were unable to maintain the soldier's condition. Therefore, the majority of the cooks would cook dishes with spirit energy ingredients. Zhu Yu, who was standing behind Tang Yin, squinted his eyes and glanced at Wei Dafu, who had an ugly expression on his face. He knew what was going on. This is called the 4 treasures soup. It's a dish that I cooked using all the ingredients. Since it was cooked in 4 woks at the same time, the essence of the ingredients was extracted. That's why it's called the 4 treasures soup, Bufang introduced. He took out a ceramic bowl and scooped out a spoonful of soup from each of the four woks. He poured the soup into the bowl. The four kinds of soup were mixed in the bowl, but they were clearly separated. Each of them occupied a separate area and did not mix with the other. Try it. Bufang handed the ceramic bowl to Tang Yin. The steaming hot air was accompanied by a tempting fragrance. Tang Yin subconsciously took the ceramic bowl. He scooped up a mouthful of soup. Tang Yin's eyes immediately widened. This mouthful of soup seemed to be dispersing in his mouth, and all sorts of flavors flooded his mind. This mouthful of soup seemed to have fused with countless ingredients. The flavors constantly changed in his mouth, and it was incomparably refreshing. This is unbelievable. Was this really cooked using ordinary ingredients? Tang Yin was in a state of shock for a long time. The higher his cultivation level, the more he understood the difference between ingredients with spirit energy. The more precious the spirit energy contained in the ingredients, the more concentrated the spirit energy. When cooked, the fragrance and taste would be more delicious. Bufang actually used ordinary ingredients to cook the taste of ingredients with spirit energy. As expected of the black-hearted owner of the Imperial City's little black-hearted store, the solemn voice of the system echoed in Bufang's mind. This four-treasure soup was actually recognized by the system. It became the first dish that was recognized by the system in the Cook's Army unit. So, he only needed to cook 2 dishes that were judged to be qualified by the system to complete the mission and obtain the fragment of the God of Cooking set. Bufang suddenly felt a little happy in his heart. Zhu Yu and Wei Dafu also scooped up a bowl of soup each. After drinking it, they were speechless for a long time. Zhu Yu was shocked, while Wei Dafu was silent. Wei Dafu knew that he was wrong, extremely wrong. This Bufang's culinary skills had already far exceeded the scope of his imagination. It was already in existence that he could only look up to. Just this 4 treasures soup alone was not something that he could cook. Although this 4 treasures soup was only made with ordinary ingredients, after drinking it, he felt his condition improving rapidly. He actually felt like he was drinking a dish made with spirit energy ingredients. Wei Dafu was incomparably bitter. Good. Wei Dafu, with the young master's culinary skills, you actually want to bury him. I think he must be old and blind. Since you like to bury people so much, then in the future, you and the young master should exchange positions. From now on, the young master will be the captain of the Cook's Army unit. Zhu Yu's complexion turned cold as he sneered. Wei Dafu's body suddenly trembled, and his face was filled with bitterness. Tang Yin squinted his eyes as he drank the soup. This warm soup flowed into his heart and seemed to make his injuries slightly better. He minded his own business and drank the soup. As for Zhu Yu punishing Wei Dafu, he was too lazy to even look at it. There's no need. I'm not interested in this captain position. Just prepare the spirit energy ingredients for me. Bufang interrupted Zhu Yu's words. He was not the least bit interested in the captain of the Cook's Army unit. He only wanted to cook good dishes and make them pass the system's evaluation as soon as possible. However, Zhu Yu still made a decision in the end. Wei Dafu was still left in the area for cooking ordinary ingredients. Several cooks of the Cook's Army unit carried Bufang's 4 cauldrons and left the area. They arrived at the soldiers' tents and distributed the 4 treasures soup. Mo Lin pulled the reins and sat on the back of the spirit beast. Behind him was a densely packed army. He gazed at the Western Mystery Army, which had set up camp in the distance, and a trace of a sneer appeared on his face. A figure was floating in the air. He was holding a talisman in his hand. The talismans converged into a magic array and revolved around his hand. The Western Mystery Army is just a distance away. Let's go and annihilate them. The 7th grade battle saint supporting them is injured and is not in a good condition. This is the best time to attack. After annihilating the Western Mystery Army, we can turn to Mo Luo City and completely occupy it. After that, we can launch an attack on the Western Mystery City. The black-robed elder was floating in the air. His sleeves fluttered as he spoke in an awe-inspiring manner. Mo Lin's eyes immediately lit up. He waved the long spear in his hand and bellowed. Then, the army behind him charged, toward the Western Mystery Army's camp. Chapter 295. It smells so good. It's really delicious. Yes, this dish is really good. It's so delicious. I feel like my whole body is full of energy after drinking it. Bufang's four treasure soup was distributed to the soldiers. Every soldier who drank it was full of praise. This dish was truly delicious. Although the dishes cooked by Bufang were made with ordinary ingredients that did not contain any spirit energy, because Bufang's cooking method was based on true energy, a trace of his true energy would always seep into the dish and nourish it. This was the main reason why the dish was so delicious. Honorbu is indeed Honorbu. Your dishes are still so popular, Tang Yin said with a smile. It was really unbelievable that Bufang would appear in this army camp. He was hesitating whether he should tell his master in Ayan. However, after thinking about it, he decided to wait until he returned to the Western Mystery City. It was a rare opportunity to drink Honorbu's soup for free. Therefore, Tang Yin joined the soldiers and got himself a few portions of the soup. However, just as everyone was drinking the soup, a war cry came from outside the camp. The sound of a bugle horn lingered in the camp. Zhu Yu's complexion suddenly changed. He drank the hot soup in his bowl in one gulp, then turned around and walked out of the camp. The sound of the bugle horn indicated that the enemy had come to attack the camp. The Western Mystery Army had already been forced out of Mo Luo City's territory, but the enemy was still so overbearing. Zhu Yu's complexion was somewhat ugly and filled with anger. After reminding Honorbu to be careful, Tang Yin also turned around and left. Since the enemy had come to attack, the Shurasek sorcerer would probably appear as well. He wanted to kill all of them and turn them into the souls of the magic array in his hands. Although Bufang's soup wasn't much, there were still several hundred soldiers who drank it. These several hundred soldiers felt their spirits trembling, and they brandished their weapons as they charged out of the camp. Their monstrous aura stunned the enemies who were charging at them. The battle soon erupted again. The two armies clashed with a loud bang, and the sound of war cries was deafening. Inside the campsite, Bufang collected the 4 woks that had been distributed. Then, he carried the woks and planned to walk toward his tent. Wei Dafu and many soldiers of the cook's army unit stood in the distance with complicated expressions on their faces. They looked at Bufang with unsightly expressions. They didn't know how to face Bufang. They thought he was just a newcomer that they could bully at will, but they didn't expect him to have such a strong background. Wei Dafu didn't want to believe it, but the scene he just saw was enough to prove it. As for Wei Dafu, his fate was to be reduced from the captain of the cook's army unit to an ordinary cook in the cook's army unit. This was worse than killing him. Buzz buzz. The sound of 2 bowstrings being pulled rang out. Then, arrows as fast as lightning burst forth from afar, instantly piercing through the 2 cook's army guards. Wei Dafu and the others widened their eyes as they raised their heads to look into the distance. There were dozens of figures riding spirit beasts galloping over. "It's the enemy!" Wei Dafu and the others immediately shouted. The location of the supply transport had actually been discovered by the enemy, and they were charging over. This was enough to prove the cruelty of this war. Once the supply was destroyed, it meant that the soldiers of the Western Mystery Army would lose their food supply. This was definitely a disaster for the soldiers of the Third Corporation. At this time, the cook's army unit needed to join the battle. Protecting the supply was their responsibility. They could hold kitchen knives or machetes. The number of enemies wasn't large, but each of them was skilled. Moreover, these enemies were riding spirit beasts, so their speed was too fast. Swoosh, swoosh. Arrows were shot from the longbows in the hands of the enemies. Their speed was extremely fast. In just a short while, several cook's army guards were shot and nailed to the ground. Bufang's pupils constricted. For the first time, he felt a cold, killing intent sweeping over. This was war, a real battlefield where only one side could survive. Destroy the supply. The general has given the order. We must not let a single soldier of the Western Mystery Army return. A deafening roar came from among the enemies. Their imposing manner made the cook's army guards' legs weak. They felt a little hopeless. Their numbers were about the same as the enemies, but in terms of battle prowess, they were much weaker. Bu Fong, who was carrying 4 walks on his back, slightly moved his body and dodged the round of arrows. His gaze was solemn as he looked at the group of soldiers charging over. Xiao Bai appeared beside him. His mechanical eyes flickered with a red glow that sent chills down one's spine. Ding! 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 One arrow after another hit its body, emitting a crisp sound. Then, with a sweep of Xiao Bai's hand, all the arrows were swept away and broken. The enemies riding on the spirit beasts were also taken aback. They didn't expect that the iron lump that suddenly appeared would be able to block all their arrows. However, they didn't pay too much attention to it. The sound of hooves resounded as 2 enemies charged toward Xiao Bai and Bu Fong with spears in their hands. Since arrows couldn't penetrate it, they would just use spears. After all, anyone who obstructed them from destroying the supply would have to die. Their goal was to destroy the Western Mystery Army supply so that everyone in the Western Mystery Army would be left behind. This group of people was Mo Lin's capable subordinates. Every one of them had a high level of cultivation. Mo Lin sent them out to destroy the supply for safety reasons. Killing intent detected. Purple eye mode activated. Xiao Bai muttered. Then, his red eyes turned into a deep purple. The purple was so deep that it seemed capable of stealing one's soul. 2 swiftly galloping spirit beasts, 2 4th-grade battle spirits, and 2 spears charged toward Xiao Bai and Bu Fong mercilessly. The moment the purple eye mode was activated, Xiao Bai's entire aura changed. His figure instantly shot out and blocked in front of Bu Fong. He raised his palm and actually tried to grab the 2 spears. "You're courting death." The enemies widened their eyes and fiercely thrust out their spears. However, Xiao Bai's palm forcefully grabbed onto the 2 spears. Sparks flew in all directions, causing the 2 people who were charging forward to be pushed off the back of the spirit beast due to inertia. A purple light flashed in Xiao Bai's eyes. He shook his palm that was holding onto the tips of the 2 spears and forcefully swung them down. The 2 spirit beasts were ruthlessly slammed onto the ground and stopped their forward momentum. The spirit beasts were only 2nd-grade spirit beasts. How could they withstand such an attack? They immediately fell to the ground and spat out blood as they panted heavily. The 2 enemy soldiers were also swept away by the spears. Then, Xiao Bai casually tossed them out. The spears directly pierced through them and nailed them to the ground. Fresh blood flowed all over the ground. This scene was shocking. Regardless of whether it was the enemies or the soldiers from the Cook's Army unit, they were all dumbfounded as they looked at this scene. Wei Dafu fell to the ground on his butt, and his mouth was trembling. That scene was too terrifying. The 2 enemy soldiers who were nailed to the ground were still staring with their eyes wide open. They were filled with unwillingness. This clothes-stripping demon was actually so violent. Those were cavalrymen who were charging at a high speed, yet they were forcefully pulled down. Their spirit beasts were whipped to death, and they were nailed to the ground. It turned out that there was such a terrifying existence around Bu Fong. They actually foolishly went to find trouble with him. When they recalled that Xiao Bai only stripped them of their clothes, they felt a wave of relief. With the strength of that metal lump, killing them would be as easy as flipping his palm. Bu Fong carried 4 walks on his back. He indifferently swept his gaze over the 2 enemies who were nailed to the ground. Then, he swept his gaze over Wei Dafu and the others who were holding onto their long blades and preparing to fight against the enemies. His face was expressionless as he turned around and continued forward. The small group of enemies was enraged. One after another, they roared and charged toward Xiao Bai. Their small group was one of Mo Lin's powerful subordinates. However, they had lost many people in this mission. Xiao Bai's purple eyes flickered. His arm quickly transformed into a huge machete. Dozens of people surrounded Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai fiercely charged forward. Then, the Cook's Army unit witnessed a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. The enemies who were pressuring them to the point where they couldn't even breathe were actually destroyed by that metal lump. Fresh blood splattered everywhere. With every slash, this group of people was slaughtered by that metal lump. They didn't even have the strength to retaliate. Among the corpses on the ground, Xiao Bai's spotlessly white body slowly stood up. The blood that splattered on his body was automatically expelled, leaving him untainted by even a speck of dust. Xiao Bai's purple eyes flickered and then turned into a red glow. His mechanical head turned and swept a glance at the Cook's army unit, who were all looking at him in fear. Then, he strode forward and chased after Buffon, who was carrying 4 walks on his back. The wind blew, blowing away the blood on the ground. Wei Dafu felt that it was a miracle that he was still alive. Chapter 296. Battle cries reverberated throughout the entire campsite. Sparks flew everywhere, and the sound of arrows being shot was enough to tear one's mind apart, causing goosebumps to rise all over one's body. Mo Lin led his cavalry and charged into the midst of the enemy. They were invincible, and wherever their long spears swept across, they left a trail of blood behind them. Zhu Yu charged over and clashed with Mo Lin. The commanders of the 2 armies finally engaged in a fierce battle. Both of them fought until their blood boiled and their eyes were bloodshot. In the sky, a black-robed Shura sect warrior hovered in the air, holding 5 spinning talismans in his hand. The talismans emitted a demonic glow, as if emitting a peculiar suction force, absorbing the remnant souls and spiritual essences of the numerous corpses below. Before the corpses of the soldiers on the ground had even turned cold, their wailing spiritual essences were dragged out and absorbed into the array formed by the talismans. The black-robed man's eyes were filled with excitement, and the muscles on his face twitched uncontrollably. A ray of sword light flashed as Tang Yin dashed out from the campsite, aiming straight for the Shura sect warrior holding the talisman array. The expert immediately let out an explosive roar. Pitch-black true energy surged forth and slapped toward Tang Yin's sword light. This palm strike was filled with an imposing aura that was enough to shake a mountain as it came crashing down with a loud bang. Tang Yin's expression immediately became extremely solemn. His body was already heavily injured, and facing this palm strike, he felt an immense pressure. The battle in the sky did not slow down the battle below. The 2 armies fought back and forth, and blood splattered on the yellow sand. Wei Dafu heaved a sigh of relief, but his entire body felt cold. Not only him, but everyone in the Cook's army unit was trembling on the ground, not daring to even breathe loudly. The corpses that littered the ground were like nightmares, reflected in the depths of their eyes. Even though these were the corpses of their enemies, the scene just now was truly unforgettable. That lump of metal was actually so powerful that they found it hard to breathe. However, even though they were shocked and frightened, they heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts. Their rations were safe, and they now had hope again. Wei Dafu and the rest stood up and began to process the rations, preparing to transport them away. However, just as they pushed away some provisions, the ground began to tremble. The sound of horse hooves colliding with the ground entered their ears. In their vision, another group of people charged over. Enemies! Everyone in the Cook's army unit shouted and pulled out their machetes. Some of them couldn't find their machetes, so they held onto their kitchen knives instead. It was quite an imposing sight. There were only 3 enemies. All 3 of them wore black robes, and their auras were somewhat sinister. They looked at the corpses on the ground and frowned. There's actually an expert guarding the rear of the rations. I was wondering why this elite team couldn't complete the mission after so long. So, it's because they met an expert. The black-robed expert laughed coldly. He glanced at the corpses on the ground and then at the Cook's army unit. His face suddenly turned cold. However, all of you have to die. The black-robed expert's eyes widened. He suddenly tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and galloped down from his horse. His claw, which was accompanied by a surge of pitch-black, true energy, pierced through the chests of several Cook's army unit members and killed them. These three were experts of the Shura sect. Their cultivation level had reached 5th grade Battle King. They were like wolves that had entered a flock of sheep. Killing them was as easy as flipping their hands. Long Kai turned around in fright. Facing these three demon-like people, he simply couldn't muster up the courage to resist. He turned around and fled into the distance. Wei Dafu was the same. He frantically ran away. He also wanted to protect the rations, but the cultivation level of these three people was too high. Even though he wanted to, he didn't have the strength. Trying to escape, one of the black-robed experts sneered and immediately dashed forward. His target was Long Kai. His bloodstained claw was aimed at Long Kai's heart. Long Kai's tender face was filled with terror. His entire body was frozen stiff by the killing intent that was sweeping toward him. Just as the bloody claw, which was dripping with blood, was about to pierce through Long Kai's body, an indifferent voice came from not far away. It was accompanied by a whistling sound. "You can't kill him." The indifferent voice was devoid of any emotion. A black walk spun and whistled toward the black-robed expert. "What the hell?" The black-robed expert squinted his eyes. He was actually startled by a walk that was flying toward him. The black-robed expert was infuriated. He casually swatted the walk in an attempt to shatter it. However, when the bloody claw collided with the walk, it was sent flying by a terrifying force. The black walk exploded in midair. Bufang slowly walked over from afar. Xiaobai followed beside him. Xiaobai's eyes turned a deep purple with every step he took. "Looks like you are the hidden expert. You actually killed an elite squad of ours. You have some guts." The black-robed expert sneered. Then, the three of them gathered together and looked at Bufang. Bufang patted Xiaobai's plump belly. The corners of his mouth curled up. He was too lazy to talk nonsense with this group of people. Boom, boom, boom. 3 surging waves of true energy spread out. The aura of these 3 people had actually reached the Battle King level. In the army, a Battle King was an existence that could become a commander. It was no wonder that the Cook's army unit was not a match for these 3 people. The purple radiance suddenly flourished, causing the figures of the 3 people to freeze. Then, they felt a gust of cold wind, and a figure rapidly dashed toward them. It was the iron puppet beside the youth. He actually dared to rely on a puppet to deal with them? Was he looking down on them? Bufang stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His face was indifferent as he calmly watched the battle. With Xiaobai's appearance, he was very calm. The cruelty of war was beyond his imagination. In this battlefield, life seemed to have become somewhat insignificant. The cooks who were just talking about delicacies with him a moment ago had now turned into ice-cold corpses. It really made people sigh. "Kill them all." Bufang sighed. His gaze was slightly gloomy as he said. Xiaobai's figure paused for a moment. Then, like a storm, he dashed out. His fist smashed out as if it could break a mountain. A black-robed expert was sent flying. His chest was deeply caved in, and he was completely unable to retaliate. Pucci, a mouthful of blood spurted out from the black-robed expert's mouth. That person directly fell to the ground. He did not even have the strength to crawl back up. With one of his hands turned into a huge machete, Xiaobai fiercely stomped his foot. Then, he dashed out as fast as lightning. The blade flashed. How could the 2 people, who were already shocked, block it? In just an instant, they were sent flying. Their abdomens were cut horizontally, and their blood gushed out like a fountain. 3 Battle King experts, in the hands of Xiaobai, did not even have the slightest ability to retaliate. Boom! 1 punch for each person. After 3 punches, Xiaobai reverted back to his original red-eyed appearance and returned to Bufang's side. A good military chef's training was actually ruined just like that. It's really annoying. Bufang scratched his head, took a deep breath, and muttered. Then, his gaze became sharp. He brought Xiaobai into the distance and slowly walked away. In that direction, battle cries shook the heavens. Long Kai and Wei Dafu's eyes were wide open. They hid in a corner and shivered, not even daring to breathe loudly. Those 3 powerful cultivators in the hands of that lump of metal couldn't even withstand one move. The outcome of the battle was decided in an instant. Just how terrifying was that lump of metal? Long Kai tremblingly crawled up from the ground. He actually mustered up his courage and scrambled to follow behind Bufong, running toward the direction where Bufong disappeared. Tang Yin spurted out a mouthful of blood. His complexion became a little sallow. The Shura sect warrior standing proudly in the sky in the distance forced him to vomit blood with just one hand. The two of them were not on the same level at all. After all, he had just become a 7th grade battle saint. Compared to a veteran 7th grade battle saint, the gap was still too big, especially the opponent's pitch-black true energy. When it bombarded him, it carried a corrosive power. He had to constantly summon his true energy to defend, or else he would be seriously injured by the corrosion. As time went by, he was no longer a match for the opponent. The Celestial Arcanum sect actually sent a piece of trash like you. Does the Celestial Arcanum sect really think that there's no one left in the Shura sect? The warrior sneered as he swatted the long sword in Tang Yin's hand. Then, with a turn of his hand, a blood-colored long sword suddenly appeared in his hand. With a wave of the sword, a blood-colored sword energy tore through the air and slashed toward Tang Yin, intending to kill him. The Shura sect warrior was very excited. Tang Yin was a 7th grade battle saint. Even though he had just advanced, he was still a 7th grade battle saint. His soul essence must be very rich. Tang Yin's soul essence was equivalent to the soul essences of dozens of soldiers. If he could collect this soul essence, then his trip would truly be a success. He could even complete the task assigned by the High Priestess. With a slash of the sword, blood splattered everywhere. Tang Yin's pupils shrank as he was forcefully slashed into the ground, causing a violent explosion to erupt from the impact. Cough, cough, spitting out a mouthful of blood, Tang Yin crawled up from the ground with a pale complexion. He felt that he was going to die here. He was no match for the Shura sect demon. Looks like you're the mastermind. Are you the one who ruined my military training? An indifferent voice rang out. Then, from the distance, 2 figures leisurely strolled over from the battle of tens of thousands of soldiers. Tang Yin was taken aback. He turned his head to look, and his pupils shrank. Senior Boo. Tang Yin's face suddenly revealed an excited expression. That's right. He had actually forgotten about the terrifying existence known as Bufong. He had long since heard about the battle in the Imperial City. That battle was terrifying, and it had also made Bufong's little store famous. Many experts had turned into skeletons in that battle. Holding the 5 rotating jade talismans in one hand, the Shura sect warrior tilted his head and squinted his eyes at the slowly approaching Bufong and Xiaobai. Who are you? Another one coming to die? A mere 6th grade battle emperor. How dare you be so arrogant? As a veteran 7th grade battle saint, this Shura sect warrior naturally had discerning eyes. Even though Bufong's cultivation level wasn't obvious, he could still tell at a glance that Bufong was a 6th grade battle emperor. As for the iron puppet, it didn't emit any true energy waves, so he didn't pay much attention to it. A 7th grade battle saint and a 6th grade battle emperor. The corners of the Shura sect warrior's mouth curled up. Another one coming to deliver soul essences. Looks like the harvest this time will be great. Chapter 297. In the Western Mystery City, the city lord, Kong Yao, was respectfully following behind a tall and slender woman. Beside him was his eldest son, Kong Xian. Not only was there respect on his face, but there was also an unconcealable look of adoration. Kong Xian's heart was burning with passion. His body couldn't help but tremble as he looked at the woman in front of him. It was the first time he had seen such a beautiful woman, a woman he had fallen in love with at first sight. The 3rd elder of the Celestial Arcanum sect, Ai Yin, was said to be an 8th grade war god. She had a strong cultivation level and a beautiful face. Her whole body emitted an irresistible charm. Kong Xian was deeply captivated by her. Ai Yin clasped her hands behind her back as she strolled on top of the Western Mystery City. Her fine black hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall. She raised her head, her fair skin tinged with a tinge of redness. Her big eyes stared straight at the dark sky in the distance. "You only sent the Third Corps to support Luo City?" Anayan asked calmly, her voice a little cold. "Elder and I don't underestimate the Third Corps of the Western Mystery City. Although it is the weakest troop in the Western Mystery Army, it is comparable to the elite troops of a big city. It is more than enough to support Luo City," Kong Xian said confidently. Kong Yao smiled and stroked his beard. He trusted in his son's confidence. As the city lord of Western Mystery City, he had presided over the Northwest for so many years. There were very few things that could endanger Western Mystery City, so he was very carefree. Yin frowned and coldly glanced at the extraordinarily handsome and confident Kong Xian. She said, "What if the Third Corps of the Western Mystery City fails and is annihilated?" "Impossible," Kong Xian said. If Luo City is taken, it is equivalent to grabbing the lifeline of the Western Mystery City. The Western Mystery City will fall into the enemy's encirclement. I don't know what trump card the Western Mystery City has, but I am here to help to prevent the Shura sect demons from wantonly killing. As for the survival of the Western Mystery City, it has nothing to do with me." Anayan smiled coldly. She was in a bad mood. She glanced at the father and son, then turned around and left. Kong Yao and Kong Xian froze on the spot and looked at each other. "Father, why don't we send the First Army there?" "Elder and I has a point," Kong Xian said after thinking for a while. "I'll leave this matter to you." Kong Yao stroked his beard and chuckled. "I really don't know what right you, a mere 6th grade battle emperor, have to be so arrogant." The Shura sect expert hovered in the air, holding 5 jade talismans in his hands. The array was still spinning, and wailing white spiritual essences were constantly injected into it. This array was so evil. Bufang's gaze swept through the array, and he furrowed his brows. "Senior Bu, this person is a demon from the Shura sect. His cultivation level is very high. They are currently leading the war against the Light Wind Empire and plundering countless spiritual essences and souls. They're definitely plotting something big. We must stop him," Tang Yin said as he clutched his chest, and blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. "Shura sect." Bufang narrowed his eyes. Another force he had never heard of, but what did it have to do with him? Noisy. The Shura sect will eventually rise again. You people who dare to stop the rise of the Shura sect must die. The expert bellowed. The aura on his body became stronger and stronger, and there seemed to be light surging in his eyes. With a whistling sound, the Shura sect expert appeared in front of Bufang. His claw, which was emitting a blood-red radiance and surrounded by pitch-black true energy, slammed down on Bufang. A 6th grade battle emperor was truly nothing in his eyes. However, obtaining the spiritual essence of a 6th grade battle emperor was not a bad deal. He was not the slightest bit worried that Bufang could withstand this attack. The power of this claw was not something a mere 6th grade battle emperor could withstand. Moreover, the Celestial Arcanum sect's 7th grade battle saint was already seriously injured and did not have the ability to withstand this attack. Therefore, in his eyes, Bufang must die. Bang! A giant steel palm suddenly appeared in front of him. The blood-red claw ruthlessly smashed onto the steel palm, producing a violent sound. The Shura sect expert's face froze, and his figure swiftly retreated. Violent waves of air surged out in all directions, swirling up thousands of sandstorms. Bufang stood indifferently with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the retreating Shura sect expert. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes had already turned into a deep purple, once again activating the purple eye mode. Tang Yin looked at Xiao Bai's figure and was suddenly excited. He knew that Xiao Bai was very strong. It seemed that even 8th grade war gods could not defeat Xiao Bai. Since Xiao Bai was here, this time victory was in the bag. Boom! Without saying a word, Whitey dashed out at an extremely fast speed. With a single leap, it leaped high into the air, bringing with it a surging wave of pressure as it charged towards the Shura sect warrior. What? The Shura sect expert was extremely shocked at this moment. He did not expect this iron lump to be able to withstand his attack. Indeed, you have the capital to be arrogant. With a sneer, the blood-red light in the Shura sect expert's eyes suddenly intensified. Then, he clenched one of his hands, and the surging pitch-black true energy converged together, forming a giant energy ball. That energy ball ruthlessly smashed toward Whitey, who was rushing over. With a loud bang, the sky lit up. The explosion occurred in the air, and countless waves of air rolled out. In the sky, a giant energy ball enveloped Xiao Bai's body. Within the pitch-black color, there was a tinge of blood. That energy was full of corrosive effects, as if it wanted to erode Xiao Bai completely and disappear. Tang Yin's body trembled, and a trace of worry appeared on his face. The Shura sect demons' methods were extremely vicious. Their true energy actually contained corrosive effects, which was simply disgusting. He did not know if Xiao Bai could withstand it. He turned his head to look at Bu Fong, only to find that Bu Fong did not have the slightest trace of worry. Bu Fong's eyes were still so indifferent, looking at the Shura sect expert in the air as if he was looking at a dead man. The Shura sect expert looked at Xiao Bai, who was wrapped up in the giant energy ball, and suddenly burst into laughter in the air. However, his laughter soon came to an abrupt halt. Under his gaze, the energy ball was abruptly torn apart, and a fair and plump figure leaped out from the energy ball. Xiao Bai's entire body was shiny, and the corrosive true energy actually did not leave a single wound on him. The Shura sect expert's heart instantly turned cold. Then, under his gaze, Xiao Bai's fist was already smashing toward him. Boom! The enormous force was completely beyond his expectations. With a swoosh, his entire body was smashed into the ground by Xiao Bai's fist. The 5 talisman magic arrays also broke away from his control and floated in the air. Xiao Bai landed with a loud bang. His purple eyes became even more sinister, and the light in his eyes swept across the battlefield, causing the surrounding soldiers to subconsciously retreat. The 2 armies that were fighting at close quarters also stopped fighting. One by one, they spurred their horses to stand behind the 2 sides, watching the battle unfold. Mo Lin and Zhu Yu were clear that this battle would determine the outcome of the battle. If the Shura sect expert won, then the Western Mystery Third Corps would not be able to escape this calamity. If the Iron Lump won, then the final outcome of this battle would be hard to predict. A loud noise came from within the rubble, and the Shura sect expert rushed out. The black robe on his body was torn to shreds, revealing the sturdy, muscular body underneath. A purple light flashed in Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes. His arm turned into a giant machete, and his figure once again burst forth. Blade light flickered, and blade energy crisscrossed. The Shura sect expert roared. A long spear appeared in his hand, and he began to fight with Xiao Bai. His heart surged with anger, and he wanted to smash the iron lump into pieces. However, he soon discovered that he was completely no match for the puppet. The puppet was extremely powerful. Every time it attacked, he was knocked back. After a few times, the web between his thumb and index finger was torn, and blood splattered everywhere. A blade swept across, and he felt a chill in his chest. This blade almost sliced him in half. The Shura sect expert's eyes shrank, and a trace of terror instantly appeared on his face. Having almost died under the puppet's blade several times, he finally understood the gap between him and Xiao Bai. His heart turned cold. He glanced at Bu Fong, who was looking at him indifferently, and the corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a sinister expression. This is just a puppet. Since it's a puppet, it must have a controller. After killing your controller, I want to see if this puppet can still kill me. The Shura sect expert casually waved his hand. Instantly, a beam of black light shot out from his palm, rapidly expanding. Boom! With a loud bang, a giant black lizard landed on the ground. The lizard's eyes rolled around, and a murderous aura burst forth. Its forelegs moved rapidly on the ground, and with a loud noise, it sped toward Bu Fong. Its bloody mouth opened wide, and a monstrous stench gushed out. Its razor-sharp teeth gleamed under the sunlight. This was actually a 7th-grade spirit beast. Tang Yin's expression changed drastically. However, he was severely injured at the moment, so how could he resist this spirit beast giant lizard? Xiaobai wanted to help, but he was firmly held back by the Shura sect expert. Even after withstanding 2 slashes from Xiaobai, he still had to delay Xiaobai. He kept on laughing, and his eyes were filled with excitement. "Darling, bite this guy to death for me. I'll give you an extra meal when we get back." Ha ha ha. This was a spirit beast he raised, and its cultivation level was very high. He believed that a 6th-grade battle emperor like Bu Fong would be devoured in a single bite. He had been holding back from releasing this giant lizard because he didn't want to attract the attention of the Celestial Arcanum sect experts. Once this giant lizard was released, even an entire city would be slaughtered to the last man. Such a high-profile act, the high priestess wouldn't allow them to do it. The scales on the giant lizard's body glowed brightly. Its body twisted, and its 4 claws swung rapidly. Rumbling sounds resounded. Behind Bufong, the faces of Zhu Yu's army changed. At this moment, all the soldiers' faces were drained of blood. This gigantic creature was simply a nightmarish existence. Smelling the disgusting stench, Bufong immediately furrowed his brows and curled his lips in disgust. Green smoke curled around his hand, and suddenly a pitch-black kitchen knife appeared in his hand. A kitchen knife? A trace of disdain flashed across the Shura sect expert's eyes. A kitchen knife was useless. Roar. With a loud roar, the giant lizard swallowed Bufong in one gulp. Chapter 298. He was swallowed. In the distance, Zhu Yu's pupils shrank and his heart turned cold. The terrifying aura emitted by the giant lizard made his whole body tremble. He was the commander of the Western Mystery Army's 3rd Army, but his cultivation level was only that of a 6th-grade battle emperor. Bufong was also a 6th-grade battle emperor, but he was swallowed by the giant lizard in one gulp. "Senior Bu." Tang Yin's heart tightened, and he couldn't help but shout. He swung the long sword in his hand, sending waves of sword energy toward the giant lizard. However, the giant lizard rolled its eyes and swung its steel-like tail, sweeping away all the sword energy. The Shura sect warrior burst into laughter, his eyes filled with uncontrollable excitement. Although he was suppressed by the puppet in front of him to the point where he couldn't even let out a fart and his body was slashed by the giant machete, he believed that he would soon be able to press the puppet to the ground and give it a good beating. A puppet that had lost its master's control was just a pile of scrap metal. Boom! The Shura sect warrior was once again slashed by Xiaobai's machete. Fresh blood spurted out, and his whole body was sent crashing into the distance, causing the ground to shake violently. "Damn it! Come on, come at me again." The Shura sect warrior struggled to get up from the ground, his eyes filled with a hint of madness. "Damned iron lump! Why don't you chop me to death?" Xiaobai's purple eyes flickered as he froze on the spot. Tang Yin's pupils shrank, and so did Zhu Yu's. And Mo Lin, on the other hand, was laughing excitedly. The puppet finally stopped moving. The Shura sect warrior threw his head back and laughed. His long hair was disheveled, and his eyes were filled with viciousness. He swung his long spear and stomped on the ground. He actually dashed toward Xiaobai, intending to pierce through the iron lump with his spear. He wanted to turn this iron lump into a hornet's nest. This spear strike condensed his essence, energy, and spirit, and he didn't hold back at all. Previously, when facing Xiaobai, he felt like he didn't even have the ability to fight back. This made him feel extremely sullen. He was a battle saint, but he had never felt so sullen before. He wanted to return all the humiliation he had suffered to this lump of metal. Since Bufong was swallowed by the giant lizard, the Shura sect warriors weren't worried that the puppet would retaliate. The Shura sect originated from the southern region, and there were many secrets recorded within the sect, including many records regarding puppets. There was a puppet sect in the continent, and it was an extremely powerful sect. The members of that sect possessed many puppets, and each of them possessed extremely powerful battle prowess. However, once the puppet master was killed, these puppets would lose their battle prowess unless they were refined again. Since the puppet in front of him was so strong, it was very likely that Xiao Bai's face was related to the puppet sect. Since that was the case, he would be safe once he killed the puppet's master. As he laughed, the wind and clouds surged. As the spear pierced forward, a deep pit seemed to have been pierced through the air. Zhu Yu despaired, and Tang Yin's face turned pale. Could it be that Senior Bu was really eaten by the gigantic lizard? Was the third core of Xixian really going to be destroyed here? Swoosh! However, just as the Shura sect warrior's spear was about to pierce Xiao Bai's body, the purple glow in Xiao Bai's eyes suddenly intensified. That glow was like a multicolored sunset, causing the Shura sect warrior's eyes to become misty. What the hell? The machete whizzed past, and the Shura sect warrior instantly felt a tearing pain. Half of his body was cleaved into two halves. The long spear fell powerlessly to the ground, and his whole body was ruthlessly slammed into the ground by a tremendous force. How is this possible? How can this puppet still move? A trace of madness and disbelief appeared in the Shura sect warrior's eyes. He lifted his head and saw Xiao Bai brandishing the machete in his hand, slashing at him. In the distance, the fork-spitting giant lizard's eyes suddenly widened, and its mouth opened wide. Then, a dazzling golden blade light flashed, and the giant lizard's mouth exploded. Blood splattered everywhere, and the lizard's painful howls could be heard. Amidst the vigorous blood mist, a figure slowly emerged. It was a skinny figure, carrying a large kitchen knife as he slowly emerged. True energy swirled around him, and a strong wind whistled past. The hazy blood mist was instantly blown away, revealing the skinny figure's appearance. Bufang's face was indifferent. He held the golden dragon bone kitchen knife in one hand, and the blade was emitting a dazzling golden light. With a wave of the kitchen knife, an enormous pressure arose. That pressure made Mo Lin, Zhu Yu, and the others' hearts sink. They were all quite shocked. However, the pupils of the giant lizard, whose mouth had been chopped off, shrank, and its body fell to the ground. It looked at Bufang's figure with a face full of terror. The pressure that came from a superior made it unable to summon any thoughts of resistance. What's going on? Baby, stand up and bite him to death for me. Don't lie there. Bite him. The Shura sect warrior's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He covered his shoulder with one hand and bellowed angrily. Bufang's body froze when he heard that. He held the golden dragon bone kitchen knife in one hand and turned to look at the Shura sect warrior. You want this beast to bite me? This beast dares to bite me? Bufang said calmly. His voice wasn't loud, but it clearly reached the Shura sect warrior's ears. The warrior's pupil shrank as he saw Bufang raise the golden kitchen knife in his hand. The giant kitchen knife spun in the young man's hand, and then swoosh. The speed was so fast that it was hard for the naked eye to follow. Countless golden knife lights swirled around, and it was so dazzling that it shocked the onlookers. Amidst a series of miserable howls, the giant lizard was dissected alive, and its skin was peeled off by Bufang. With his meteor knife skill, which had been cultivated to the extreme, dissecting a giant lizard was a piece of cake. A 7th grade spirit beast ingredient. Not bad. Looks like I found the next dish. With a flick of his hand, the giant golden dragon bone kitchen knife lost its golden glow and turned into a wisp of green smoke. Bufang kept it into the totem in his hand. Looking at the giant lizard ingredient, the corners of his mouth curled up. He was just fretting over how to prepare the next dish. He didn't expect to receive a 7th grade spirit beast ingredient. The second dish that would satisfy the system would be ready soon. The Shura sect warrior was dumbfounded, and his eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. His baby was actually turned into Bufang's ingredient. A mouthful of blood rushed to his head, and he couldn't help but cough out a mouthful of blood. He was so angry at Bufang. He had raised this giant lizard since it was a baby, and it was his good companion, his precious baby. But now it had fallen here, and in the end, it was going to be eaten by someone else. Unforgivable. I'm going to kill you. The Shurasect warrior's eyes were bloodshot. He crawled up from the ground and glared viciously at Bufong. However, just as he got up, an ice-cold glint of a blade flashed by, directly slicing him in half. Half of his body was flung high up into the air, and then he fell to the ground. Blood gushed out like a fountain. In the end, his eyes were still filled with unwillingness. But as the magic array formed by the 5 jade talismans in the sky suddenly trembled, then a misty white spiritual essence was extracted from the Shurasect warrior's corpse. The spiritual essence's face was filled with terror, and it bared its fangs and brandished its claws, trying to escape, but to no avail. The Shurasect warrior's spiritual essence was also sucked into the magic array formed by the jade talismans, and he let out a howl of terror. The jade talismans glowed with an incomparably warm light, and, with a jolt in the air, it was as if it was being pulled by something, and it was actually trying to escape into the distance. Tang Yin's expression changed. He activated his sword art, and his figure dashed toward the jade talismans. This magic array had gathered at least tens of thousands of spiritual essences. Once it returned to the Shurasect warrior's hands, it would become a huge disaster. A cold sword light poured out in torrents. Tang Yin wanted to destroy this magic array. However, a sword will suddenly burst out from the surroundings of the magic array. It was a sword that was filled with blood and slaughter. Tang Yin's figure suddenly stiffened. The long sword in his hand actually broke into pieces under this sword will. The sword will continued forward, crossing the vast sky, as if it wanted to obliterate Tang Yin. Xiao Bai suddenly leaped up high from the ground, slapped Tang Yin back to the ground, and used his fist to meet the sword will head-on. With a loud explosion, countless sword energies gushed out. Xiao Bai's figure was ruthlessly smashed down from the sky and smashed into the ground, creating a huge crater. Blood dripped from the corner of Tang Yin's mouth, and he struggled to get up from the ground. He looked at the disappearing jade talisman magic array with lingering fear. That was the Supreme Sword Will. This magic array was actually protected by the Supreme Sword Will. As expected, the Shurasect really valued this magic array. What is the use of this magic array? Tang Yin's mouth was trembling, and his limbs and bones were all trembling at this moment. He still had lingering fears after almost dying under the Supreme Sword Will. Bufong's face was also somewhat solemn. However, he didn't care about the Supreme Sword Will or the disappearing jade talisman magic array. Arriving before the deep crater that Xiao Bai fell into, Xiao Bai climbed out of it. The corner of Bufong's eye twitched. Xiao Bai's body actually had a hideous sword wound. After all, this was only Xiao Bai's clone. If Xiao Bai's real body was here, then the Supreme Sword will be nothing. Patting Xiao Bai's chubby belly, Bufong sighed inwardly. The purple light in Xiao Bai's eyes had already dissipated, turning back into a warm red glow. He raised his hand to scratch his head, and the sword wound on his belly was actually healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The surrounding people were all dumbfounded, and Mo Lin was the first to regain his senses. The Shurasect warriors were defeated. Mo Lin looked at Bufong with eyes full of fear. This guy, everyone listen to my order. Retreat immediately. Mo Lin roared, then mounted his spirit horse, and without the slightest desire to continue fighting, fled into the distance. His subordinates followed one after another. Zhu Yu's army's morale was instantly boosted, and their battle cries shook the heavens. They actually chased after Mo Lin. For a moment, the situation was completely one-sided. However, Zhu Yu's army could only chase after the opponent and scare Mo Lin a little. It was impossible for them to kill him. Outside Mo Luo City, a beam of light flashed past, entering one of the towering tents. Inside the tent, an expert wrapped in a black cloak suddenly opened his eyes, raised his hand and grabbed the talisman magic array floating in front of him. The 5 talismans on the magic array were densely covered in cracks, and this made the black-cloaked man's pupils shrink. This is the magic array controlled by New-er. Why did it fly to my place? Moreover, even the high priestess' sword will attach to it was shattered. It seems like New-er is in grave danger. The black-cloaked man took a deep breath, and his eyes were unreadable. Could it be that the Celestial Arcanum sect or the 100,000 Mountains made a move? Chapter 299. In the vast border city, an angry snort suddenly came from an ancient pitch-black iron tower. The voice wasn't loud, but it caused the 3 figures sitting cross-legged around the iron tower to open their eyes. Why is the high priestess so angry? Who provoked the high priestess? This was a figure shrouded in a pitch-black robe. His eyes were filled with confusion. Beside him were 2 other figures also shrouded in black robes. Who cares? In any case, those who provoke the high priestess will not have a good ending. We, the 3 blood guards, just have to do our duty. Now that the venerable Lord has begun to collect spiritual essences from all over the empire, the day the departed soul, orb, is awakened will be the day our Shura sect rises. When that time comes, we must let those barbarians of the southern region know our terror. A faint laughter sounded, mixed with a cold snort. Then, the 3 figures once again closed their eyes. Senior Boo, why did you dig 2 shallow pits? Tang Yin's complexion was a little pale. The previous battle had seriously injured his body, causing his blood and energy to be a little chaotic. Of course I dug these pits to cook. What else did you think I was doing? Digging graves for this beast? I'm not so kind as to dig graves for a beast that wants to eat me, Bu Fong said calmly. 2 huge pits were dug in the ground in front of him. The soil in the pits was dug out and scattered all over the ground, forming a small hill beside them. Cooking? Digging pits can be used to cook. This time, not only was Tang Yin a little confused, but the others also widened their eyes in confusion. Bu Fong didn't care about their doubts. He was very excited. Ever since he joined the Cook's Army unit, he didn't have any good ingredients, so he never had the chance to show off his skills. Now that he had this giant lizard, he might be able to cook a dish that would satisfy the system. Say, Senior, the spirit leaves you wanted are here. In the distance, Wei Dafu and Long Kai were carrying a large pile of green leaves as they slowly ran over. These green leaves were densely covered in veined patterns, and there was even some faint spiritual energy dispersing from them. Clearly, these were not ordinary spirit leaves. Bu Fong indifferently nodded his head and instructed Wei Dafu and Long Kai to spread the spirit leaves into the pit. While Long Kai and Wei Dafu were busy, Bu Fong walked to the corpse of the giant iguana. The giant iguana had been dissected by him, and all the meat was scattered on the ground. However, Bu Fong had only gone through a simple dissection and didn't go through any meticulous sculpting. At this moment, he was going to process the giant iguana's meat. The giant lizard and the dragon clan were inextricably linked, so it should also possess the dragon clan's bloodline. These black scales were very hard, but under the dragon bone kitchen knife, they were quickly peeled off. After cleaning the giant iguana's meat, Bu Fong processed a huge piece of meat that was about the size of a millstone. The vein patterns on the meat were bright red, and it looked like a plump fish. He twirled the dragon bone kitchen knife in his hand, and then cut a few holes on the giant iguana's meat. Bu Fong took out some spirit herbs that he found from the rations. These spirit herbs were of a very low grade, but they were pretty good for seasoning. He chopped these spirit herbs into small pieces and spread them on the giant iguana's fresh meat. The giant iguana's meat was neatly cut into pieces, but they were still connected by a point. Senior, it's all done. Wei Dafu trembled as he stood up and respectfully said to Bu Fong. He didn't dare to be disrespectful. The kid in front of him was no longer the kid who had just entered the Cook's Army unit. He was afraid that Bu Fong would suddenly find him to settle the score. If that happened, he would have nowhere to hide in this army camp. Give me the extra leaves, Bufang said as he put away the kitchen knife and looked at Wei Dafu. Wei Dafu's heart trembled, and he hurriedly stuffed all the remaining spirit leaves into Bufang's hands. After Bufang received them, he used the spirit leaves to wrap up the giant iguana's meat and placed it into the shallow pit. Then, he used the soil to cover half of the pit. Wei Dafu's eyes flashed with a hint of confusion. He had been cooking for so many years, but he had never seen such a strange cooking method. Digging a pit to cook? How is it going to cook the giant iguana's meat? However, in the next moment, Bufang's instructions made him understand. This was because Bufang had ordered someone to pile a huge pile of firewood on top of the half-filled pit. Finally, he used true energy to ignite the flames, causing the firewood to burn. The flames were monstrous, and thick smoke billowed. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back in satisfaction as he looked at the surging flames. Behind him, the crowd looked at each other in dismay. Tang Yin, Zhu Yu, Wei Dafu, and the others could not understand this dish at all. This cooking method was simply unheard of. Cooking like this, without understanding the situation in the dish at all. How is it possible to make a delicious dish? Wei Dafu curled his lips. Even though Bufang had been slapping his face, he still did not believe that this method could be used to cook a delicious dish. After all, this method was unheard of. There were a total of 2 pits. Bufang used the same method to wrap up the giant iguana's meat with spirit leaves and placed it into the pit. Then he filled half of the pit with firewood and burned it. This method was the cooking method of a famous dish in Bufang's previous world. Bufang had adapted this method and made some slight changes to make it more suitable for cooking the giant iguana's meat. Bufang stood in front of the raging fire and rubbed his chin. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Flower iguana meat? It feels so weird. Bufang muttered to himself with a strange expression on his face. He slowly walked around the 2 shallow burning pits. From time to time, he would send a ball of true energy into the shallow pits. His true energy was infused into the flames, causing the flames to become even more vigorous. Senior Bu's cooking methods are really strange. Tang Yin and the others did not know whether to laugh or cry. They thought that Bufang was just messing around. Then, everyone began to go about their own business. This fire burned for about 6 hours. The light from the flames filled the sky and illuminated the entire military camp. The scorching sun in the sky had also set. Night fell, and 2 crescent moons hung high in the sky. Bufang stood in front of the 2 burning fires. His eyes narrowed, and he took a deep breath. Then, he raised his hand and slapped it toward the fire. Vigorous true energy surged out from his body and directly smashed into the 2 bonfires, causing the flames on the 2 bonfires to be extinguished in an instant. Thick smoke billowed up like 2 intertwining black dragons soaring into the sky. The attention of Tang Yin and the others was attracted. One by one, they walked out of their tents and came to Bufang's side. Many soldiers were also attracted and surrounded the area. They all looked at Bufang curiously. Is the cooking done? Tang Yin's eyes instantly lit up. Everyone walked to Bufang's side with a curious expression on their faces. They wondered how a dish cooked using this cooking method that they had never seen before would taste. A few soldiers walked up and swept away the black charcoal on the ground, revealing the charred soil. Dig up the soil. Bufang looked at the soldiers and said, "Be careful. Don't destroy the dish inside." Could this really be used to cook a dish? Because the soil was burned, all the moisture inside had been burned away. Therefore, it was a little difficult to dig because the soil had become extremely hard. After busying themselves for a while, the soldiers finally dug up the soil and touched the spirit leaf inside. When the spirit leaf was plucked out, the originally lush spirit leaf had actually become yellow and withered, as if it had lost all its spirit. Everyone's pupils shrank, and a strange expression appeared on their faces. Because from the appearance of the spirit leaf, they could roughly determine what would happen to the giant iguana meat inside. It seemed like Owner Bu had failed this time. Did he fail? Tang Yin thought. However, Bufang's expression did not change in the slightest. He walked to the shallow pit and pulled out the yellowish spirit leaf. Then, with a grab of his hand, he directly grabbed a large piece of meat wrapped in the spirit leaf. The spirit leaf on the outside of the meat was also yellow and had lost all its spirit energy. "It's here." Everyone became spirited and stared at the spirit leaf. Underneath the spirit leaf was Bu Fong's dish, the 7th grade giant iguana meat. Even though they had yet to smell the aroma, many people could not help but feel hungry when they thought that it was the giant iguana meat. After all, it was the meat of a 7th grade spirit beast. How could they not look forward to it? Not everyone had the chance to eat the meat of a 7th grade spirit beast. Green smoke curled up, and the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in Bu Fong's hand. With a twirl of the knife, Bu Fong lifted the dragon bone kitchen knife as if it was light and gently swiped it across the top of the yellow spirit leaf. As the kitchen knife swiped across, the yellow spirit leaf actually split open. From the split opening, a dazzling light beam shot out. "Beggar iguana meat done." Chapter 300. One beam of light. Two beams of light. Densely packed. It filled everyone's eyes. The light was too dazzling, causing the people who had been staring at the dish to squint their eyes. In the distance, Wei Dafu's entire body trembled. His eyes widened in disbelief. He stretched out his finger, pointing at the dish that was emitting beams of light. His mouth couldn't close. A dish that can light up? The shock in Wei Dafu's heart was almost indescribable. It was the first time he had seen such a dish that could light up. To be able to make a dish glow, it was a realm of cooking that he could never reach in his entire life. The light disappeared, but the people's eyes couldn't move away. They were completely captivated. As the beam of light dissipated, a wave of rolling hot air filled the air. The hot air surged upwards like a dense mist, and a special meaty aroma filled the air, lingering in the hearts of everyone present. This was a very special aroma. There was the aroma of meat, the fragrance of grass, and a kind of intoxicating flower. Three special and different feelings mixed together, forming this unique aroma. The meat quality is just right. Bu Fong used the dragon bone kitchen knife to gently press on the giant iguana meat that was exposed after the spirit leaves were peeled off. Instantly, the oil seeped out. The giant iguana meat was full of elasticity, overflowing with luster, and was quite tempting. Bu Fong took out this bag of meat, placed it on the ground, and completely cut open the spirit leaves. The whole piece of giant iguana meat was exposed, and the aroma burst out unrestrainedly, almost enveloping the entire army camp. "Smells so good. I want to eat it. I want to be drunk in this meat aroma. I've never smelled such a delicious meat aroma before." The soldiers were all intoxicated. Their eyes were somewhat blurred, and they couldn't help but smile as they shook their heads. Bu Fong smelled the aroma of the giant iguana meat. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. Then he spun the dragon bone kitchen knife in his hand, twirled it, and directly cut the giant iguana meat. The people only saw a flash of knife light in front of them. In the next instant, Bu Fong finished cutting. From afar, the giant iguana's meat seemed to be intact. However, upon closer inspection, everyone could see that the giant iguana's meat was covered in fine knife marks. "Long Kai, bring the bowl over," Bu Fong said indifferently to Long Kai, who was watching from afar with his mouth wide open. Long Kai came back to his senses, and his eyes immediately lit up. He took a stack of pottery bowls and ran over. With a twist of the dragon bone kitchen knife, Bu Fong slapped a piece of meat. Immediately, a shiny piece of giant iguana meat, dripping with warm oil, flew up and fell into the bowl. Steam rose up, blurring Long Kai's eyes. Long Kai's eyes widened, and he couldn't help but gulp down a mouthful of saliva. "Send it to them. It's everyone's dinner tonight," Bu Fong said. Only then did Long Kai reluctantly walk toward Tang Yin and the others with a piece of giant iguana meat in his hands. Under Zhu Yu's courtesy, the first piece of giant iguana meat fell into Tang Yin's hands. Holding a pair of chopsticks, Tang Yin looked at the piece of meat with a face full of excitement. As he smelled the fragrance of the meat, his stomach let out a rumbling sound. When the chopsticks pressed down on the giant iguana meat, the oil immediately spilled out and the fragrance filled the air. Using the chopsticks to pick up the meat, Tang Yin brought it to his mouth with trembling hands and took a bite. The chewiness he imagined did not appear. This piece of meat was actually very tender and smooth. The moment it entered his mouth, the texture was surprisingly good. It was soft in his mouth, and with a light bite, it felt like his oral cavity was being massaged. When the giant iguana meat entered his stomach, it was as if a small furnace was burning in his abdomen. Waves of energy filled his entire body, invigorating him. As the fiery heat surged, Tang Yin felt waves of spirit energy flowing out and spreading to his limbs and bones, allowing him to feel that his injuries had recovered by a large margin. In the distance, Bu Fong slapped again, and another piece of giant iguana meat flew into the pottery bowl. Just like that, he distributed the pieces of giant iguana meat to the soldiers. A big piece of giant iguana meat was cut into several hundred pieces and distributed to the soldiers. It also allowed many soldiers to eat to their heart's content. The giant iguana meat from the second pit was also taken out. It had the same taste and the same heat. Bu Fong also distributed this piece of meat to every soldier so that most of them could taste this delicacy. Of course, he also kept a piece for himself. As he ate the gigantic iguana meat, his eyes slightly narrowed. This was because the taste of the gigantic iguana meat was really not bad. The meat of a 7th-grade spirit beast was rich in spirit energy. Moreover, the meat of this gigantic iguana was different from that of ordinary spirit beasts. It's indeed very delicious. Bu Fong was very satisfied. Using the beggar's chicken method to cook, it could perfectly retain the fragrance, causing the meat to be extremely tender and smooth and the texture to be excellent. There were many soldiers, but there wasn't that much giant iguana meat. Therefore, many of the soldiers' faces were filled with grief because they didn't get to taste this delicacy. They simply didn't want to live anymore. The meat fragrance that was still lingering in the air made them want to eat it. Everyone's face was filled with desire. However, it would take a lot of time to cook such a piece of giant iguana meat. Therefore, they could only eat the dishes made by the other cook's army units. Their hearts ached so much that they couldn't breathe. After cleaning up, Bu Fong also stretched his waist and let out a long breath. His face revealed a hint of relief. The system's notification rang in his mind. Obviously, this flower iguana was evaluated as qualified by the system. This flower iguana was cooked using the famous beggar's chicken method from his previous world. The technique was unique, and the cooking method was unheard of. In addition, the giant iguana meat was so delicious that it was recognized by the system, so Bu Fong didn't think there was any problem. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, the third army continued to move forward. They had to speed up and reach Mo Luo City as soon as possible. The goal of this trip was to rescue Mo Luo City. They were ambushed before they even reached Mo Luo City. Mo Luo City must be suffering from a terrifying bombardment. Perhaps it had already been breached. Even if it wasn't breached, it was probably in imminent danger. Mo Luo City. 2 bright moons hung high in the pitch-black night sky, emitting a cold radiance. The dilapidated city wall was full of ravines. Soldiers patrolled on top of the wall. They were wearing armor and holding torches. They were fully focused and didn't dare to relax for even a moment. Suddenly, the sound of bowstrings snapping resounded in the pitch-black night sky. A dense rain of arrows whistled down from the sky. These arrows smashed onto the city wall, producing tinkling sounds. The somewhat dilapidated city wall was also smashed into pieces. Enemy attack. The soldiers on the city wall suddenly roared. Then, earth-shaking battle cries burst out from below the city wall. Figures emerged from the night sky, charging toward the city with surging battle intent. A figure holding a magic array formed by 5 jade talismans rose into the air. His face was extremely solemn, even a little gloomy. He originally wanted to carry out a normal war and slaughter, But Nu Er's death made him feel a sense of urgency. He had to speed up the process of the war. Floating in the void, the Shura sect warrior raised his hand. Then, numerous small blood-colored flying swords flew out of his palm. The flying swords circled in the air, whistling through the air. Then, they shot out, tearing the air apart. Boom! The city wall was suddenly bombarded by the flying swords. The violent tremors caused the soldiers on the city wall to bleed from their orifices. Damn demon! With a loud roar, a white-robed figure dashed out from Mo Luo City, soaring into the sky with a fierce, murderous intent. Hu Yifeng's face was full of murderous intent. He glared at the black-robed figure in the void with an imposing manner. This was the person who killed several of his brothers from the 13 bandits of Majo. This enmity was absolutely irreconcilable. The battle in the sky once again began, but it was obvious that Hu Yifeng was at a disadvantage. Sparks scattered, and the flames of war soared to the sky. The cruel war in Mo Luo City was still ongoing. The white, misty soul essences that were still warm were extracted from the corpses and mixed into the jade formation, making the formation look even more demonic. The first ray of morning sunlight leaped over the border of the plain, blooming with a bright red light. The third corp of Western Mystery City finally saw the majestic figure of Mo Luo City from afar. As they approached Mo Luo City, the air was filled with a chilling intent. The ground was dyed red with blood, and scattered corpses were scattered all over. There were enemies, and there were also Mo Luo City's defenders. The soldiers of the third corp of Western Mystery City were silent. They felt a heavy and indescribable sorrow. When they got close to the city gate, the guards on the city wall actually pulled their bowstrings and shot sharp arrows filled with energy towards them. The arrows pierced the ground. Zhu Yu stopped his troops with a grave expression. His lips trembled as he looked at the swaying flag above Mo Luo City. Mo Luo City had fallen. Retreat! Zhu Yu helplessly gave the order after taking a deep look at Mo Luo City. The soldiers of the Third Corps retreated to the rear. They had painstakingly rushed to Mo Luo City, but unfortunately, Mo Luo City was still invaded. With their military strength, it was no different from a fool's dream to take down Mo Luo City again. Thus, Zhu Yu ordered the troops to retreat. Mo Luo City had fallen, and the next city to be besieged would be Western Mystery City. Zhu Yu had to return to Western Mystery City and inform the city lord. On the city wall of Western Mystery City, Anayin stood with her hands clasped behind her back. Her beautiful face was filled with seriousness as she gazed into the distance. Her heart felt heavy as she gazed at the dark clouds in the sky. She could feel that a terrifying crisis was rapidly approaching. The Western Mystery City was about to fall into a precarious situation. The Third Corps, which had gone to reinforce Mo Luo City, had unexpectedly returned. This further confirmed her suspicions. She walked down the city wall and arrived at the Third Corporation. She went to look for Tang Yin. After all, Tang Yin was her disciple. However, when she saw Tang Yin, she was slightly taken aback. This was because there was actually a skinny young man standing beside Tang Yin. This young man looked very familiar. Honorbu, why are you here? Yin widened her eyes with a strange expression on her face. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.